You want me to do it again?
I want you to do it again. I want you to be fun this time.
All right, fine. Hey, listeners, it's Josh.
I don't like that. Okay. We are doing a live show at Caveat.
Yes.
Here in New York City.
Yes.
For all of you listeners that are here in New York City.
Yes.
And even for those of you who are not, stay tuned because we are going to be at Caveat on April 27th.
Yes.
Doors are open at 6:30 p.m.
Oh, you're really
And the
selling
episode
this.
is The Worst of All Possible Worlds Presents. What's the rest of it?
The Worst of All Possible Worlds presents Brian is Back.
I
the
am.
85th episode podcast spectacular live from New York City featuring special guest, and this is new information, Michael Kupperman.
Hey! You did it without being really fucking soy or boring this
How about
time.
you suck my fucking dick?
That's right.
bitch?
AJ is also here.
I'm also here. Listeners will remember that AJ is also here. But they'll also remember that Michael Kupperman was our guest on the heart condition episode and introduced us to the madness that was Bob Hoskins having Denzel Washington's ghost live inside of him.
Inside of his body.
So tickets are live, obviously.
Yep.
Check the link in the episode description for that.
Yes.
If you show up in person, you might get a taste of some free brand new merchandise.
Yeah,
that
like
we have.
It
Don't
might-
get too excited.
It might be a sticker.
But if you
It's probably going to be a sticker.
Stickers are great.
But
We
if you
love
can't be
stickers.
here, tune in. You can stream live. We will be here with you in spirit, and you won't be able to get COVID from us because we are all carrying it.
That's
for
right.
every minute
We're
of our
going to be
lives.
coughing so much during this live show. Please buy tickets.
Oh, it's gonna be so unfunny if we get COVID doing this show.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast to come back after 3 days. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. And this week, we are very excited because, well, you know, we like to talk about a lot of different things here. We like to talk about
allegedly, yeah.
the nature of film and cinema sometimes. And this time we're diving into a case study of a piece of media that I think we've been interested in doing for a while, which
Yeah.
is The Last Temptation of Christ.
Yeah, it's a fancy movie time crossover
Yeah.
episode.
It's
We're
not
very
that
excited.
we've talked about movies before. This is not a crossover. We just also talk about movies on fancy movies.
Well, this is
No, but it's a crossover though, because we're both
not.
here, and it's like that show is now here.
This week we are joined by Matt Barbot, playwright, man about town, really.
Jesus movie geek.
Yeah.
I read the novel in high school and then watched the movie afterward.
Was it assigned to you in high school, or is
No.
it you being a Jesus geek?
It was me and a Catholic all-boys school going like, this book sounds cooler than some of my classes.
Did it live up to what you were hoping for?
Yeah,
or-
I was really into the novel, and then I think at the time, the movie was kind of just like weird and alienating to me. But watching it again, I appreciated it a lot more. So I was glad to have another crack at it.
Paul Schrader, the main screenwriter on the movie, the one who's credited, said that there's basically 12 movies you could make out of the book. And so you just have to reach in and grab the one that you want to do, which of course was very exciting for him as a filmmaker.
Sure. I mean, watching this movie, it seems like he just tried to do all 12, though. There are so many different parts of this movie that feel like different versions of the movie that he just kind of compiled into a Frankenstein's monster.
Some of that feels to me from watching different interviews like it's just that I think Paul Schrader and Martin Scorsese and Willem Dafoe had there were different things that were interesting to them about the book.
Yes, and there were a lot of different things that they did on set when they were filming in Morocco on a very low budget where they had to move fast. Sometimes it's like, well, we can't do this scene. We can't get enough people. We don't have the right set or anything like that. So we're like, I don't know, let's do something else
Yeah,
here.
country girls make do, things of that nature.
Yeah. A lot of corn cobs.
I'm curious to hear, though, you know,
Shucked on Broadway.
before we actually talk
Broadway's
about
back.
the movie
Yeah.
and how it got made.
Yeah.
Matt, you were mentioning, you know, Catholic school kid, wanted to get to know a bit more about alternate approaches to the story of Jesus. So you read the book, then you saw the movie. What were the big things that jumped out at you at that point? Like what made, because I remember talking to you at some point, I think one of us talking to you at some point, and you were like, yeah, if you ever do Last Temptation, like put me in.
I think the presentation of the character of Jesus in the novel as someone who is deeply human and afflicted. I was really interested in the ways that the novel and the movie preserves a lot of this. I think like reframes a lot of what is familiar. Something that always sticks with me is where Jesus begins to tell parables, and one thing that the novel does, I think, is really interesting, where he attributes his use of parable to not being a very good public speaker, which I think is something that's not. I think we tend to think of parables as very clever and very an interesting way to get a message across, but the Jesus in the movie is sort of insecure about his ability to get his point across, insecure about his education.
Yeah, he's always kind of like when you read the Gospels, even there's like, well, the kingdom of heaven is it's like a mustard seed. No, it's like that, he restates it over and over.
I am
and over
the seagull.
again.
No, that's not right. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's like a really fascinating thing where he sort of apologizes before launching into that story. I'm interested in when I was reading about a little bit about the making of the film, but also like reading interviews. There's like an insistence from a lot of people that this Jesus is like as sinful as everyone, and I think that's a little bit like not in evidence actually in the film.
It's strange, isn't it?
If human nature is to like resist divinity, which is like super foundational to Christianity, right? Then that would mean that Jesus's like human nature suffers and resists and flees from this responsibility.
And that's really the core of what this is, and in the core of what the controversy around the making of this
wrote this in Greece in 1955, about 2 years before his death, and he was writing it as an older man. He was a best-selling author. He wrote the book. Translated it into English as Zorba the Greek. But this creates a huge controversy, right? Because the Greek Orthodox Church, they get a hold of this. They hate it. When it finally comes stateside, I don't think it gets to the U.S. until like 1960. But the book causes a bit of a stir in the United States on its own. In 1963, the John Birch Society and various other Southern California right-wing groups end up trying to get it removed from a San Diego library.
Priest at the time who was like, you shouldn't return this book to the library because it'll be a sin.
Very cool.
Because if you return it, you will be sinning and letting someone else read the book.
That sounds like the Diocese of San Diego is what I'll say.
But something that's worth noting at this point is already it's so much based on the reputation of the thing as opposed to having actually read the thing, engaged with it, and like people are hearing already secondhand, thirdhand.
Jesus does sex. I mean, this is the main thing that everyone gets mad about is Jesus does sex, and I don't even think it's really even described in the book. Now it's depicted in the movie. Yeah. But librarians of America, the stubborn people that they are all like, oh, okay, this sounds like a good book to have stocked up. And it increases circulation in our libraries by like 1,000 or something like that. And it becomes more well known, and it becomes assigned reading at Fordham University in 1968 and at various other like Catholic learning institutions. Like it's something that is being engaged with. And Sidney Lumet first tries to get a movie made of it in the 70s. That never takes off. And then Scorsese is like, okay, yeah, I want to make this is going to be the Christ movie that I'm going to make, because he loved the old Cecil B. DeMille Christian epics, and it made its way to the studios. It got dropped by the studios, and then he got it picked up again for about half the budget.
Paul Schrader, I'm assuming, was part of the package at this point as well.
I mean, Scorsese, like you, Matt, is a Jesus nerd. I mean, he's a nerd. He's a nerd in general. He's a movie nerd. He's a Jesus nerd. He's not actually well read, and he talked about this. Like he grew up basically on the streets. He did not have books in his house, including the Bible. Oh wow! And he was actually given a copy of this book on the Roger Corman movie that he was working on way back in the day, Boxcar Bertha. It took him a very long time to actually get around to reading it, but he's he really is like in his purest form. He's a nerd, right? He is someone who really believes in like film preservation, and he loves the old movies that he saw on TV and in the theaters when he was a child, and he loved the scripture. He was going to become a priest. Like he thought, well, if any, I'm just going to be a nerd about Jesus for the rest of my life. And then, ended up doing movies instead. But he maintains to this day his Catholic faith. He believes in it very deeply and devoutly. It is a part of who he is. And Schrader, maybe in the 80s, wouldn't have exactly called himself a Christian. He currently does.
I didn't know that.
Since First Reformed, he gave an interview and he talked about like, I've been going to church for a long time.
Oh, wow.
Paul Schrader, for those of you who don't know, went to the school that Brian and I went to. He went to Calvin College.
Named after John Calvin.
And his background is very similar to my own.
With the extremity ratcheted up a little bit. Yeah. Because the Reformed tradition at the time when Paul Schrader was a child they didn't see movies.
Right.
They did not go to movies. There was a really interesting, I was talking to someone who used to be like on the board of trustees at Calvin College a long time ago. And he talked about reading the minutes, going back to even the stuff that was like when they were still taking the minutes in Dutch all the way through the 50s.
Oh, yeah.
wow.
And there was a professor who got reprimanded officially because he was seen at the Wealthy Street Theater. And he said, oh, no. I just stepped into the lobby to light my pipe. Then they saw him at the theater again.
Yeah.
And he was gone.
God is
He
that.
was like that same guy.
What is this theater?
It was just a movie theater.
Oh, it was just a movie
No, this
theater?
wasn't a porno theater. This was
just a normal ass movie theater.
Like that same guy I was talking to, he went to Calvin in the mid 50s, and he and his girlfriend, now wife, snuck out their first date to go to that theater to see Walt Disney's The Grand Canyon.
Amazing. But I mean, really what we need to take away from this is that Paul Schrader, in response to that very strict, cloistered evangelical background, he kind of was like, oh, I'm going to be the edgy guy who shocks you. That's kind of the direction he ended up going. And so a lot of what the adaptation ended up becoming, sort of the way that it was framed, and I think a lot of the actual PR campaign for this movie when it was coming out was Paul Schrader being like, I'm going to piss off the people who pissed me off when I was a kid. Deal with it, motherfuckers.
Yeah, Paul Schrader saw a lot of what he did as an affliction.
Right.
And I don't think he's really built that way anymore.
Yeah, where does this movie lie in the timeline with Piss Christ? Like where in terms
That we'll get to in just a few minutes.
Okay, great.
Because that is actually very important to all of this, but it's after this movie, because the machine that they build to fight against The Last Temptation of Christ is then used against the NEA, against Mapplethorpe, against Piss Christ.
Oh, interesting.
So he when he was at Calvin, he reviewed movies, he talked about movies, they even brought in a sort of film discussion because The Sound of Music came out right around the time that he went to Calvin, which is when Reformed people started watching movies.
Oh.
Specifically because of The Sound of Music.
Wait, what?
Why? I can't even. That takes up too much time on its
My
own.
family loves The Sound of Music. That's all I'll
It
say
is a
about
big
that.
deal.
my mom,
Is
and
it-
she's an atheist.
It's a magical film.
We had a professor. His dad was a Reformed pastor, David. His dad brought the family out. They had to go 2 towns over, and they all went and saw The Sound of Music.
What is the change that The Sound of Music? Is it too much to
Well,
get
the hills
into?
became alive. So let's
it's
go
something
ahead.
that we can get into in its own episode of the podcast.
Yeah,
honestly.
let's get now on to what happens once these creative forces come together.
Yeah.
The film starts getting made, and people catch wind of the idea of a movie where Jesus fucks, and they're not happy about
there's
it.
an unnamed evangelical working at Universal Studios.
Yes.
And he ends up taking like a mimeograph of the script and sending it to various evangelical organizations. He sends it to James Dobson over at Focus on the Family. He sends
Our
it,
boy.
most importantly,
Before
to
Odyssey.
Donald Wildmon.
We do love this man.
He really
wild
is a
man.
wild mun.
This is another like classic guy for our
He
running
really
list
is.
of guys.
What's interesting
yeah.
is this whole list of guys, except for one person that I will mention, all the Christian ones, let's say, they're all still around and their organizations are all still
Right.
around. This is sort of unlike Night Trap, where all of those grifters I mentioned and all of that hearing, you know, if they're still around, they kind of shifted to another
Is
thing.
Donald
like-
Wildman a name that means anything to you at all?
Absolutely not.
Great. Okay,
No,
just
I
wanted to
don't-
make sure.
I don't occupy my brain with these sickos.
So
The
Donald
EWTN lady
Wildman,
is in this part, right,
Donald
too?
Wildman is a Methodist minister.
Yep.
He's from deep Mississippi, and he founded a group called the American Family Association, or the AFA.
This situation with Last Temptation of Christ was sort of where he made his name. But ultimately, when you put him in the pantheon of guys,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that he's one of the like towering figures. He's not a Falwell or a Dobson or a Robertson or something
No,
like
but
that.
he was in league with Falwell for a while. So
Right.
he was an obscenity crusader in the 70s.
Okay.
He got pornos taken out of 7-Eleven chains, right? They found that
Oh,
there was
thank
a
God.
really fruitful way of going after national chains and getting boycotts of those places to get obscene materials removed, which is why you also see stuff like Blockbuster doesn't have, you know, even certain R-rated movies.
Yeah, but Slurpees just never tasted the same after that, you know?
right.
Yeah. So one of the first thing that Donald Wildman did was he got Sears to pull ads from Charlie's Angels.
What?
What?
Wait, the TV show or the Lucy Liu movie?
The thing that has commercials in it.
No, I thought they were commercials about the movie.
Sears commercials.
AJ,
broadcast on Sears.
AJ.
Which movie came first?
The TV show came first, and then the movie came, and then the movie came after that.
Yeah, the
When do
movie
you
came
think the movie
after
came
The
out?
Last Temptation of Christ.
What year do you think that
By
The Last
about
Temptation of Christ
15 years?
with Cameron Diaz
does not age. She is immortal.
So that was done with Jerry Falwell. Then
She's
he
a
ends up
bad teacher.
leaving his first group with him and starting another group without him. And I'm really interested in what that history is, and we'll never know.
Great.
He then tries to get like MASH. He tries to get advertisers pulled from that show because he thinks it's too, I don't know, lib or whatever.
Sure, why not?
And then when he founded the AFA, it was originally the National Federation for Decency. This guy's straight up just like cosplaying like it's 1910.
That's awesome.
And
Yeah.
and he was the one who had this big mailing list at this point after a decade of doing this kind of shit, and mailed the full rough script of Last Temptation of Christ to everyone in the mailing list. Now, for those who remember our episode about the Two Live Crew album, As Nasty as They Want to Be, which is one of our Adventures in Odyssey episodes, Focus on the Family ends up doing that exact same thing in the early 90s with that album's lyrics. So this I think is pioneered actually by Wildmon himself.
It would have to be so expensive too to like ship that entire script to everybody on that mailing list. That's a sizable investment.
The Birchers did not do that with the book in '63. They took passages out of the book and
but not
mimeographed those.
The
but
whole thing, yeah. And this was not a final shooting
hefty
draft
book.
of the script either.
No,
this
this
is like an
is-
early draft.
Yeah.
of it.
But again, like the point is not at all to engage with the actual material. It's to find the things that they are afraid of, that they find potentially objectionable, and to censor it.
Yeah.
This does end up coming down to censorship. You know, there's plenty of hue and cry. There's plenty of back and forth, and plenty of Don Wildman being like, "Oh, I just want to love Jesus, and I want everybody to love Jesus, and we should all love Jesus." And it's like, that's not what these guys are about.
Yeah.
They are about taking the ideas that they are afraid of and making sure that they are excluded from something that anybody can ever read, see, or even consider.
Yeah, so then joining the evangelicals here, we also get the Catholic League, all of those
That's what
sickos.
actually Matt and I call ourselves behind your backs.
Catholic League.
We're the Catholic
Is
League.
is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, we have little hats. It's really great. We're actually in communication with the Pope.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He probably thinks you're the real Catholic League, which is just another like strange far right pressure group.
But that's also how he negotiated
it's
the
actually
ad
just
buy.
softball.
It's just a nice softball league. And the nice part is we do get free Pope milk out of it. So
Okay,
that's something.
so the protests against this movie end up getting bigger and stranger. Someone actually goes to the producer's house, of course, a Jewish man, and reenacting the crucifixion in front of the house. Somehow Irv Rubin of the JDL gets involved in this too, saying that the movie is inciting anti-Semitism. Of course, the JDL is not the ADL. The JDL is a violent organization. Irv Rubin himself was arrested because he was trying to bomb various places, including a mosque. Including I believe he was a representative at the time in California.
But something that I want to note too about all of these actions that were taken, you know, some of them were taken by Wildman and his people. Others were taken sort of, maybe not directly by him, but in response to things he was saying.
Yes.
Such as, for instance, one infamous thing that happened where they bombed a theater that was going to be showing the movie.
I don't know if it was a firebombing or if they just set
it on fire.
Yeah, but there were actually two arsons that happened in France from Catholic integralist groups in the area. So yeah, that's its own sort of Western European Catholic theocrats. In the U.S., we did have some vandalism that never amounted to that, but people would go in and take knives and slash up the movie theater seats, things like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was some real danger here too. Roger Ebert talks a lot about, because he was one of the first defenders of the film, right? Basically, Scorsese was like, look, because Scorsese's whole like stance on this is just watch the movie.
Yeah.
Right. I promise it's not as salacious as you think it is, and you might actually find stuff that you can relate to in it. You just need to watch the movie. But of course, that's not really, as Josh was saying, their agenda.
There were plenty of clergymen who were going on TV, going on Oprah or whatever, going on Morton Downey Jr. show and saying, yeah, watch the movie. I think it's good.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
these people who are talking about it are citing things that don't happen in the film at any point.
I'm curious about one thing, Matt, which is, when you were growing up, what was the reputation of this movie among people in your circle? Because like I grew up hearing that this movie is like against Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Was that kind of what was in your...
My parents were like, this was a cool movie that made a lot of people mad.
Sure.
My like a lot, like, and this was like before I think it was because I like, it was like it lived in the zeitgeist, and I asked questions about that. So it was like a movie about Jesus, and I think my mom's was like, yeah, in the movie Jesus has sex in it, and like people are mad about it. But she also like was like, but it's not real in the movie,
Sure.
And then
So you had people in your life who were actually able to see it as an artistic piece of work and be like, this is making choices.
And even when I went to high school, I mean, I think there were like priests who were like,
sure,
it's a silly movie. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, you can hear this particular priest coming out. This is like, his name was Father Giacomo. He had one eye. He was very old. But he took a lot of glee in he was our church history teacher, so he had like a lot of glee about like the Renaissance church, and he would talk about like, but he got really excited talking about orgies, which he said with a hard G.
Orgies.
We love
a good orgy.
So like his whole thing about it was that it was like a silly movie, and like it didn't really matter much to him. But I do wonder, I mean, sort of as we're talking, I mean, because you're talking about like this like people censoring challenging ideas, and I do wonder to what extent like Martin Scorsese talks about like when he made the movie and he's like, I have these thoughts. Do you have these thoughts?
Yeah.
What do you think about these thoughts?
Yeah.
And like I think that's how most people engage with art.
I think especially in the Jesuit tradition too, right?
I mean, I think from a Catholic standpoint, sure, but I think like in the world, you come to a piece of art and you understand it as asking questions. And I think that there are a lot of there's a lot of this censorious impulse comes from thinking of art as like a pulpit in a way where the art is telling you a thing, and so you look at The Last Temptation of Christ,
but like
as not
focus
a piece
on the family, and James Dobson would never do that.
But I think it's like when they see that movie, what they see is a lie. And they're like, this is lying to you about Jesus. And like Martin Scorsese would say that he's not even trying to tell the truth.
Explicitly they say that
it's
at
like
the top of the movie.
It's like a story to like think about.
Obviously the book is like, it's a metaphor for a modern person. He's exploring very deeply like the historical context and like the world that Jesus lives in, but like it is about a modern person. It is about like the things that you face in modernity.
Well, I mean, specifically like the language the Orthodox Church used to ban this was like it uses like Marx and Freud, to like slander our Lord.
And something that's worth noting too is that that's a big piece that Wildmon and his people picked up on as well. Because
the guy who the editor-in-chief of Plugged In magazine over at Focus on the Family, he uses the Freud thing and over again.
Because these are other aspects of modernity that they are fighting against. And something that I want to quote here is a very interesting article that I found by David S. Olsen.
Okay.
Pumpkins.
No.
David
Jesus.
S. Pumpkins.
This is an article called The New Religious Right versus Media Wrongs, AFA Fights Temptation, from the Journal of Film and Video. And what he states in here, which I really, really like, is specifically regarding like how this sort of way of fighting works. Because it's not just about the thing or fighting against the thing. It's also about being able to chalk up, consistent dubs, right? You're using this both as, oh, look at how much they're beating us and, dragging us down as Christians, but also look at how we're winning against them.
Yes, actually, I watched a really interesting movie. Not interesting in that anyone should watch it except for me, but you can find it on YouTube. It's
archival footage of the building of Gallup, New Mexico.
No, that would be great. Actually, no, this is called Hollywood versus Religion, and it's very much it's the exact same playbook as Whose Children Are They?
Sure,
that educational propaganda movie we watched about a year ago.
Yeah.
Where it's this one guy going through all of these movies that have been made, some of the most obscure shit, to be like, see, this is Hollywood showing how much it hates Christians, but also pointing out to how like unsuccessful and unpopular these movies are, to say we're winning though.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Olsen actually says in this article. He says, and I quote, "In sum, the barbs of defeat and the laurels of victory motivate followers to pick up arms to fight the godless media.
Yeah.
Threats of defeat can move followers to action by frightening them with the consequences of inaction. If emphasized too strongly, however, these same threats can paralyze followers as determination is replaced with discouragement. Promises of victory also contain analogous tensions. These promises can motivate followers to work for change by increasing the hope of things to come, or they can induce passivity as winning is taken for granted." So it's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah, but and now they've learned the new lesson, which is just say that you've won, and then if anyone's like, "But you didn't win," just be like, "No,
Yeah, we did.
We totally did."
Yeah, it's fascinating. And the thing
Look
is,
how
they
triggered
did.
you are.
Yeah, look how triggered- yeah,
They
nature
did
man.
win in the context of The Last Temptation of Christ. The movie was not profitable
Right.
in the United States. Globally, it actually made a bit of money. Not huge, but
Considering
like,
it was only a $7 million budget.
it was a tiny movie, and it made, I think, $6 million in the U.S. box office. Right?
Yeah.
It was a big failure.
I think $5 million of that went to Peter Gabriel for the score.
Which fucks.
Which rules? It's a fantastic score.
so good.
Yeah, if you want like the full source of like everything that happened among all of this stuff, just check out Hollywood Under Siege, which is Thomas Lindlof's book that came out about a decade or so ago, which is just all about The Last Temptation of Christ.
Or you can read the book written by Don Wildmon himself, which is modestly titled
Don't.
"The Man the Networks Love to Hate."
Yeah.
Yeah, don't do that.
Don't read that book. This also became an openly, like I said before, an openly anti-Semitic movement. I was spending the last 2 weeks trying to find the clip, and I never could. But I remember watching a TV documentary about the backlash to The Last Temptation of Christ back when I was a kid, and it cuts to this one evangelist on the scene, and I think I know who it is, but I'm not going to say his name because I couldn't confirm it. Talking to an interviewer, and he fucking like stands up, kicks his seat out of the way, and starts shouting into the camera, "If you want this to be anti-Semitic, then we will make it anti-Semitic.
Wow.
We are perfectly fine with this," right? Like the one of the things that got the JDL involved was a protest in Beverly Hills saying Jewish money paid for The Last Temptation of
wow.
Christ.
Yeah.
This is entirely on board with this idea that we see all over again with critical race theory, cultural Marxism, all of these little things that's like our control, our fundamentalist control, our political project that's been going on for the last century. These are the things that are threatening it. We may be winning, but here's how to identify your enemy, and it's always secular Jews. Almost always.
Yeah, and then the full scope of this would come to fruition with Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, which is like, what if Last Temptation of Christ, but anti-Semitic as all fuck.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what's interesting is in the 70s, we had some Jesus movies. There was the BBC production Jesus of Nazareth, which was done in 2 parts, 3 parts, whatever.
How white was Jesus in that one?
Incredibly,
Was
not
that the
quite
one with
Max
Max
von.
von-
No, that's the is that the greatest story ever told? The joke with The Last Temptation of Christ is like, what's the difference between that movie and this one? And they said, well, in this one, Jesus blinks.
That's funny.
But also, the Jesus movie came out in 1979.
I remember that VHS.
Who doesn't? The Jesus movie claims to be the most seen movie worldwide. It's certainly the most translated. It has been translated into about 1,000 languages at
well,
this
of course
point.
it's been seen. They sent it to your mailbox, whether
Yes,
you wanted it
sure.
or not.
Well, and the whole thing with the Jesus movie is that they would go to remote areas, indigenous peoples, these tiny groups of people that speak a language that's not spoken by more than 1,000 people, and they translate it into that language and showed it. We did this in Zimbabwe when I went to Zimbabwe, and they showed it in Shona to a group of people that were all Southern Baptist already. But
wow.
So the Jesus movie is really important because the guy who created it was Billy Bright, the founder of Campus Crusade for Christ.
Right.
Our boy Randy Heckman, we didn't bring this up in last week's
Oh, my
episode.
God.
He and his wife met during their time in
Doing
Campus Crusade
for Christ. And for those unfamiliar, Campus Crusade for Christ is exactly what it sounds like.
Yes.
It's an organization dedicated to making more Christians on college campuses across the United States because they're being controlled by, the atheist, liberal Jews, et cetera, and blah, blah, blah.
So
blah.
the Jesus movie is pretty much just like very prosaic. It's just like all of the text is straight from the Gospels. It's just this happens, this happens, this happens. It's exactly what you would expect from like the baseline of a Jesus movie, which is why it's the Jesus movie. This
The
movie
only one, yeah.
was actually,
Notoriously.
it did have a slight bit of business in American theaters. Warner Brothers distributed it. And Warner Brothers at the exact same time also distributed Monty Python's The Life of Brian.
Yes.
Which was banned entirely in the American South. It was also banned from Cincinnati, Ohio. This is important. So Cincinnati, Ohio also had a number of anti-obscenity laws that kept porno shops from operating, even sex toys, strip clubs, anything like that did not exist in any legal capacity within the city.
Sure.
This is then targeted for the Last Temptation of Christ thing, right? We get AFA and Donald Wildmon going to Cincinnati. They get the whole, like the movie does not show there, which is why they end up using Cincinnati as their base for going after the Robert Mapplethorpe exhibit.
Okay.
The famous case is the Cincinnati Museum of Art.
Oh, shit.
And they thought the judge is going to be on our side. And then the judge was not.
I'm always amazed at how these fucking sickos are able to just find the places where they can drive the biggest wedge. That's why Focus on the Family moved to Colorado Springs. They weren't going to find the most fertile soil in Pomona, but in fucking Colorado Springs.
And Focus on the Family was one of like, I think 40 groups that moved out to Colorado Springs. They were simply the largest.
I have some really thrilling update for you.
Yes.
Actually, I just recently went on a podcast called the Sandcastle Business with a guy from Colorado Springs, Colorado, Ethan, who's one of our listeners, and he told me that now most of the storefronts that Focus on the Family owns are just different businesses. Like they've had to start renting out a lot of their campus to like dentists.
Oh, because they don't have the office space. Like they can't use all that office space
They just
anymore?
can't use it anymore. Like it's really.
But they are opening brick and mortar bookstores in Holland, Michigan.
So let's now get, I guess, to the movie itself. Because we've laid this up, obviously. We have everything that we need for a cultural flashpoint. So this movie's going to be so fucking edgy, right? This is going to this is going to be it's going to completely retool the way we think about our Lord and Savior himself,
right? Right? And it's funny to watch the TV appearances and have them object to everything else, where it's like, well, no, actually, it's because Jesus said this about divinity or whatever.
Right.
But like the controversy was all around it being the Jesus sex movie. And that's certainly all I heard as a kid was like, it's a movie where Jesus has sex with
That's
Mary
what I heard
Magdalene.
too. That was why people objected to it.
And when it first starts off, like when we like the first thing that we actually see Jesus do, which is carve a cross.
Yes.
Because he's in the cross making business for the Romans.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in this opening sequence where you're like, oh, this is the Jesus sex movie. He is attaching a belt to himself that has little like spikes on it for some sort of masochistic purpose. Like there is something decidedly like controversial about this first 20 minutes or so.
And interestingly enough, for people who have not seen Willem Dafoe in a movie from this time, he is beautiful.
Yes.
Normally the whiteness of these movies kind of like rankles me, but like for what this movie's doing, you need him to look like Max von Sydow. You need him to look like Robert Powell.
Yeah.
Because Scorsese, being the nerd that he is, like this is about, in the same way that Kazantzakis is like looking at the Gospels, Scorsese's looking at old Jesus movies.
Yeah, that's his thing.
Right, exactly.
He grew up just going to movies all the time, and just that's his canon.
It's a lot. It's a lot like, in a way, Hail Caesar, in that it's like finding the pieces of the genre and playing with them. Now, does it always do so successfully? I would argue no, and we can talk about that later. But you're exactly right that to have this film cast as a bunch of like actual like Jewish, Middle Eastern people, whatever, it wouldn't be what this movie is trying to be. The anachronism is kind of the point.
Yeah, and actually the contrast between the main cast and a lot of the background cast, which are people in Morocco.
Right.
Yes.
One of these things that is probably a budget consideration, but also I think very successful artistically.
BBC used the same sets. That's why they had sets. Like, again, they didn't have money for it. So the BBC did it. The Jesus movie shot in Morocco. Morocco was the place to go, not Israel for some reason.
Except for the Jesus Christ Superstar movie.
All we see so far is that, Jesus is prepping a cross, and it's pretty disorienting because what seems to be happening here is he's preparing to get crucified. That's
he's
what
making his own cross.
Yeah.
but that's not what's happening.
No.
But there is also, I think, there's a provocation right from the beginning where he's very explicit in the narration that he wants God to leave him alone.
Yeah.
And I think that I understand getting my hackles up if this shit mattered a ton to me on an emotional level.
Right.
But I think this is one of the things that like super interested me about this sort of the text in the movie when I was in high school was that idea that he is resisting, that he is not into it. And so even at the beginning, this idea that he's going to make crosses because what he wants is for God to hate him and leave him alone.
Well, and this plays with a central like theological question as well, one that doesn't have a satisfying answer really from any sect, which is, when does Jesus know? Because he starts as a baby. Obviously, babies can't know anything. And I think Aquinas settled on, well, he knew. He just knew from the start. He knew everything. He was already the Lord and everything else. Whereas Calvin took the line from Luke that I think it says he grew in stature and wisdom.
Right.
To mean that, yes, Jesus developed the knowledge. And of course, then we have the story from, which again, I think only appears in one gospel, where he's 12 years old and he is left behind at the temple, and they come back and get him. And he says, oh, I'm in my father's house. But this is staking a pretty clear point. It's like Jesus is 30 years old and he seems to know that he's special in some way. We don't have a discussion of the nativity at all.
No.
He, in fact, doesn't really know whether it's God or the devil. And it doesn't seem that even, I mean, in this movie, he seems to struggle with he doesn't know he's the Messiah ever.
Yeah.
He goes back and forth on this a lot. And then he's just kind of doing what feels right.
It shows it shows you sort of the like toll that something like this would take on a human mind. He's being I mean, you'd want God to leave you alone too if God was a fucking hawk, an invisible hawk that just kept attacking you.
Yeah, that's such an interesting image because they use bird sounds when these scenes are happening, and later he refers to God as like a bird. A hawk diving down and grabbing his head with his claws, which also recalls Martin Luther, right? Like, let the birds nest in my hair.
The translation I read of the novel refers to talons a lot.
Talons, yeah.
It's also worth noting at this point in the movie that Judas is already here. Judas shows up right away.
Yeah, they're all buds. They're like old chums, and Judas is basically Batman. In this world, he's been hired by like the zealots to like take out Roman soldiers like at night. Like he's action movie Jesus.
Yeah.
And he also speaks with a thick Brooklyn accent.
Yeah, he just talks. He's just talking like himself.
He's just talking like himself.
Yeah, we are not going fully from the biblical narrative, and it says as much in the fucking title card. It's this is not. Actually
this is fan fiction. Really.
I mean, from my perspective, the most offensive thing about this movie is Jesus building crosses and participating in the crucifixion.
Of other people,
of his fellow Jews, to the point where he's holding the cross as the nails are being driven in. That seems to be,
and he gets blood splatter on his face.
The most explicit. Like he has committed the crime of complicity with the Roman Empire.
There's an interesting, I think that image was really striking to me, and I hadn't remembered it from the first time I saw it, but like especially in the Catholic tradition, I'm sure for the blood of Christ and being bathed in the blood of Christ is such an evocative and sort of central tenet rhetorically for one of the first scenes of the film to have Jesus being sprayed with the blood of another Jew that he's sort of like
who also claims to be the Messiah.
Right. And also in Protestantism, are you washed in the blood and that soul cleansing blood of the Lamb, right? Like, and that image even is at the end of Ben-Hur, right? Judah's mother and sister, the lepers, end up being cured of their leprosy because the streams of blood are flowing down from the cross and get into the water and touch their skin.
So I misunderstood what was going on here pretty severely. I thought that like this was a dream, because then in the next scene you see him waking up, and I was like, was everything that just happened a dream? Is this a flashback?
Oh, interesting. Oh,
I just
that was my first impulse.
This actually follows a linear timeline. There is no flashing back or jumping back and forth in time, but it's
disorienting.
It's super disorienting, and maybe not always in a good way.
Well, I think that's true. I think something that like the movie preserves from the novel in an interesting way is that everything kind of has a dreamlike quality. Kazantzakis writes a world that is imbued with magic because he's writing from the point of view of like, this is just maybe how ancient people experience the world.
Sure.
So like in the novel, there's like an interesting where when Jesus is baptized, there's like references to water nymphs and jinn and like bowing down to him. And I think Scorsese does a pretty okay job of like the sort of boundaries of like spirit and magic and like the real world and like dream and vision and are all very porous. And so you get a lot of these really disorienting like cuts and zooms and like
he tells the stories of miracles. Actually, in the AJ and I later are going to talk about Tarkovsky's movie Stalker, which portrays miracles in the same way. There are basically no special effects in the movie.
Yeah, I know.
It's just they cut and then there's an apple tree, right?
Yeah.
I will say for this entire opening sequence, it's really good that the whole Messiah thing worked out for Jesus because he is a terrible carpenter.
True.
Those crosses look like fucking shit.
Very poorly constructed.
Well, they're what are they going to? They're functional.
They meet their purpose.
But I think it's like important for the sort of understanding of that is that like there is never a moment where he's thinking of these people as false prophets.
Yeah.
There is never a moment where he's thinking of them as not messengers of God. This is a world where people speak to God, and he is going to help the Romans kill as many of them as he can.
Yeah.
So that God will leave him the fuck alone.
Whereas Judas, on the other hand, is, being even more severely violent, and he's basically fucking Sam Fisher, honestly. Like, he's just going out there and just sneaking up behind guys and just like.
And this is speaking so much. This is I think my favorite
Assassin's
thing about
Creed
this
Galilee.
movie.
Yeah.
This is speaking to the reality of the place and time. You see, like. I feel like you really feel what it is like to be in occupied Galilee, in occupied Judea at this time, to have the Romans constantly breathing down your neck in this desert. And surrounded by like and having these competing religious groups, these zealots who are going and assassinating people, but also you have Pharisees, you have Sadducees, you have all of these different religious groups that are erupting all at the same time, and Jesus is one of many.
Can we talk about how gay this movie is for a second?
Yeah,
This movie is gay.
Yeah. What, a movie written by Paul Schrader?
A little gay? Well, and that was actually the initial reason why the initial release of this was pushed off, why the initial studio dropped it, was because they got a hold of the script and like they were less concerned about just having sex, but with how gay it was.
Yeah, I mean, the kisses that happen in this movie between men, this is not your traditional, Judas betraying Jesus with a little peck on the cheek. It is this is
not your typical like two Middle Eastern men greeting each other with a kiss. This is full on the mouth.
John the Baptist kisses him on the mouth in the same way.
Yeah.
I think so. Another thing that I sort of found interesting about the controversy too is that like part of the controversy is just ahistorical, right? Like I think like the idea of men being more affectionate with each other in a physical way that's just true.
Yeah.
Or
right.
And a different people in the ancient world having a very different relationship to sexuality and the human body, like drawing the lines differently between what's profane and what's like normal and acceptable is also just like true.
Yeah.
And so like, and you don't even have to go back that far. Like, the Renaissance artists loved drawing Christ's boner. Like they loved painting. It was called ostentatio genitalum, right? And it was like this like artistic thing where it was like you didn't show Christ's penis, but you showed like the cloth flowing in a certain way so that it looked like he had a boner, because the idea was that like that was very humanizing.
Yeah.
And so the idea of like Christ having sex is like controversial in to the extent that it is, and for the reasons that it is, seems to me very like you find like a lot of like conservatives on like alt-right conservatives online talk about this thing of like the error of presentism, which is like imposing our stuff on the past, and it's like that's really most of what they do. Is like
they're
with
taking
most things,
movements that are at most like from the 19th century,
right?
Well, and it's interesting bringing up the gay Jesus thing.
I'm not, which like it could be gay. That's fine. When I don't have a problem with that, obviously. But what I mean is
it sits between though. It sits in a place between sort of a slightly different understanding of male sexuality versus today, and I think there's also homoeroticism there.
And
It's both of those things.
from like the beginning of the post-Christ days, there have always been theories about Jesus Christ being homosexual. Christopher Marlowe, it was testified against him in court by Thomas Kidd that he said that Jesus was gay. Of course, one of the best movies, the Gospel According to St. Matthew, one of the absolute greatest movies about Jesus, was made by Pasolini, who was himself a gay man and a Marxist, but did not make but he didn't depict Jesus as gay in his film. But there was a whole moral panic in the early 80s, before even the green lighting of The Last Temptation of Christ, that Hollywood, them Jews in Hollywood was making a gay Jesus movie. There were chain letters that were going around. People were writing to their local newspapers and to local theaters saying, do not show the gay Jesus movie that was going to portray the life of Christ as though he were
Was this
a
real
homosexual
thing?
No,
Or
it
is this
didn't exist. There is no such movie. There's no such movie that ever
because
existed.
I feel like that this idea of this fixation on Jesus Christ's masculinity has come back.
Yes.
In weird, on like alt-right Twitter.
Punisher Skull Jesus.
This idea of that Jesus was not, he's too feminine, and the church has become too feminine. You sort of see that a lot now.
Mark Driscoll.
Yes, right, yes. But what I will say is that I think a lot of that sort of wispy, when you said about Jesus not blinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of that has to do with what Scorsese was saying about just divinity, right? This is a space alien. He's not a person. He's and then I think what we see with Bronx Judas here in this movie, Harvey Keitel's Bronx Judas. I mean, even Willem Dafoe is my favorite. I mean, we're getting ahead of it, but one of my favorite deliveries in the movie is the Miracle at Cana, where he's like, well, what's in those? And
the guy's
like,
not check
it's
again.
water. He's like, not checking again, it's wine.
Yeah.
He's like, no, it's water. He's like, go check.
Yeah, right.
And it's he's just like a guy,
Yeah,
and
it's very New York. It's like, no, I fixed it.
no, check, go check.
AJ, what were you wanting to say though about?
I feel like the movie kind of is half in, half out on it, in that Willem Dafoe is all in on doing a bisexual Jesus.
Sure.
It is the longing looks that he gives Judas in certain moments. This sort of
and it's every bit as longing as the looks that he gives Mary Magdalene when he goes and watches her have sex with a customer.
Yeah. There is sort of this longing for sexual connection with Judas. The problem is that Harvey Keitel is not in on the gay relationship aspect of it, or if he is, he's so pushing it down that it's almost imperceptible.
This is my problem with Keitel in particular in this movie. Is he has a certain stiffness, isn't quite the right word, but he's kind of made out of rock. At all times. His face does not, I say that as an actor who has a lot of the same problem, honestly. There is this sort of impenetrable
New York accent.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because this was from the very beginning, I actually was pretty sold on Judas for that exact reason. What I see in his portrayal is a man who has something inside of him that wants to get out, but he just refuses to let it out. And so he replaces that with violence instead. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. And as far as the longing goes, I mean, I think that there's something, and to be clear, all I meant earlier was that I think homoeroticism was probably just a lot more normal back then.
Right.
Not that it wasn't gay, but that but also that I think something that Dafoe gives is this one of my favorite lines in the movie is if I were an axe I would cut, if I were a fire I would burn, but I'm a heart so I love. And there's that sense of he is just consumed by this ability to love.
Right.
And no one else is. No one else he knows is, and no one else can. And he cannot connect. And there are these people in his life that are so important to him that he wants so badly to connect with. And there is such a catharsis, to go back to what you were saying, AJ. There is such a catharsis when he and Judas fall asleep in each other's arms.
It's very lovely.
He's
broken that barrier.
He's broken a barrier between them. That they get into this discussion and then they fall asleep together.
So we've talked a fair bit now about sort of what makes Willem Dafoe's performance as Jesus sort of distinctive. We'll talk more about it. We've talked a bit about Harvey Keitel as Judas. I want now to bring in sort of our third kind of main principle, which is Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, the first time we see Mary Magdalene is an inversion of the Stations of the Cross, right? She walks up to him as he is carrying that other man's cross, and she spits in his face. Right, rather than applying ointment
and that's
to
just
his
because
eyes.
he's a collaborator, basically, and she's mad about it.
Yeah, and it's not like he's not into it.
No, he's a little into it.
They are because he's taking that punishment, right?
Yes, exactly.
In the same way that he is flogging himself, that he is wearing this spiked belt.
Yeah, it's Jesus as masochist.
He wishes to take as much of this this pain and this torment is possible because he does not want to be the chosen of God.
Right. And I think that what Barbara Hershey does in this performance that is so impressive from the beginning is that she shows us what drives her, what drives Mary Magdalene. And this is certainly in terms of like, does it hew to or stray from the biblical account? I would actually say that Mary Magdalene in this movie is the furthest from the biblical account in that she has an inner life.
Right. Well,
she's a real person.
Also, Mary Magdalene is not a prostitute in the Bible.
Right.
That's an invention of tradition. Yeah.
Right.
But you know.
Well, and Constance Zakis does it one better, and she's a prostitute, and it's Jesus' fault.
Right. Because they knew each other as children, and he rejected her as a child.
They were betrothed. Yeah.
And that's a little like they sort of dance around this a little bit, because what happens is, you know, Jesus goes into her brothel and he watches her doing it, and he's all like, "Oh, I'm so horny." Because
there's a whole queue of people that he's waiting in who all like one by one go and have sex with Mary Magdalene. There's also a snail lady
waiting online.
There's a snail lady who's just covered in snails. I'm like, is the snail lady in line for Mary Magdalene? Turns out she's not. I'm not sure what she was doing there, but she had a lot of snails.
She was a snail vendor.
Yeah.
But
put them on your dick.
The first big encounter then that we get between Jesus and Mary Magdalene is that he's the last up, and they have a pretty charged conversation. She's nude.
We get like a hint of their past relationship. Paul Schrader is not as interested in that concept of like the rejection of Paul Schrader weirdly is less weird about women than maybe the original book is.
The book, right.
All we really get here as written in this script is that Jesus fucked her over at some point.
Yeah, they have known each other. She rejects him in the same way Judas is rejecting him because he is a collaborator with the Romans.
Yeah, it does lend some weird things of like Jesus is always watching you. I was watching this scene going, so this is what Christians imagine sex is.
Oh, yeah.
It's just Jesus sitting in the corner watching while you bang.
Maybe.
He's sitting there in the vestibule like, I don't consent.
Just jerking it furiously.
I like your Jesus voice, Matt. It's really weird.
It's his Willem Dafoe. Well, okay. But that's the other thing about Jesus in the movie, right? Is he's a weird little dude.
He's a weird guy.
He's a freaky little guy.
Weird little guy.
And that's the thing is like Willem Dafoe, even at his like most like because he really is like 30, 32 in this movie. And it's like most beautiful. He still has pretty crazy teeth, right? He has very sharp incisors.
And just sicko energy in general because Willem Dafoe is just a sicko.
Has a big crush on Willem Dafoe, and she says it's because she likes guys who are sexy but ugly. And
sure. Yeah, he's kind of ugly hot, isn't he?
I get it. What does your dad think of it?
No, but that's her, like, I don't know, she has like a thing for guys that look kind of skeletal and strange.
I will say,
like, he's a weird dude. He's kind of goblin-y.
He was perfectly cast in that movie. I once held the door at the Public once while I was on a date, and when I turned back around, Willem Dafoe had walked out, and he was like 2 inches from my face, and he said, "Thanks," and I involuntarily screamed.
He's I think that this goes back, I think, to the conversation about like whether Jesus is like, whether it's true that Jesus is as susceptible to sin in this movie as anyone else. And I think that like what we sort of see is that like he's got like spiritual Dunning-Kruger. Like he's so good that he thinks he's disgusting. You know what I mean?
Sure,
He's like, so he hates everyone else in the movie, thinks he's a fucking nerd. Like everyone, Judas doesn't like him because he's like, you should take action. You're doing this shit for the Romans, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
You know, he doesn't fuck. He doesn't like drink. He doesn't hang out. Nobody likes him.
Right.
Because all he does is like be very depressed and punish himself and hate. But it's like, it seems to just come from like this enhanced spiritual awareness that he has, that he's able to like see and be vulnerable to that kind of like self-hatred.
Yeah, it makes me think of like Notes from Underground.
They end up really talking to each other, and it's pretty charged, and she's like, "Hey, why don't you just touch me?" and tries to put his hand on her body, but he's like, no way, right? He won't do it. How did we feel about sort of this interaction and how it sort of sets up the relationship here? Did this work for you? Did the stakes work for you? Did it ground it effectively for you?
These early parts of the movie are the parts that work the best for me.
Oh, interesting.
It makes everything so 100% personal. It gives you a lot of historical like context and exoticism or whatever, you know, even if it's just invention. but it is very much grounding everything that you know about Jesus in like his past without you having to see the past.
Yeah.
It is like, oh yeah, this is someone he knows. This is someone he knows. This is someone. So he doesn't have to get to know everybody.
There's also some really wonderful work of like how to read the movie, right?
Yeah.
Like there's some really like lovely, he sees the snake and then there's the snake above the door. And then
The snake has like a symbol for a prostitute.
He doesn't want to go
was a
in.
gecko.
And then the other guy, he sees the lizards, right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
the other
Falls
guy
off the branch in a piece of very good physical comedy from the lizard.
The guy walks by him and he's like, he's struck by how like impressive that man is and thinks that he must be an angel, right? Like it's like really doing a lot of work and talking to us about the world of the film.
It's a nice payoff because of what happens later in the film, that they do eventually end up having sex, that there is a nice tease here of like, oh, there's like sexual attraction here.
Well, and
Jesus
that
is just not going to act on it in order to like fulfill his
and
destiny
well,
or
and more
whatever.
importantly than that, and this is something that we'll get more into at the end, but it's not that he has sexual desire for her. He has a deep romantic love for
Right.
her.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
It is not puerile.
The two things aren't differentiated or like
No,
they're
no.
not there's not like a strong barrier between them.
No.
I think especially Mary Magdalene like makes the case for like the body's role in love and in existence and in like the importance of your physical experience of the world.
And it's bolstered as well by Mary, the other Mary, who's also not his mother. Who again,
right.
these are all
Right.
conflated in the same way in many different parts of tradition.
And textually
And-
conflated
yes.
because what is it the angel says about one woman in the world anyway.
Mary and Martha, when he's sitting with them, and they say, "Well, why don't you just go and get married and have
Yeah.
children?" That's what God is actually calling people to
Right.
do.
Yeah.
Right. The sexual act is part of that.
Right. Yeah, I think that he's deeply in love with her. So another thing that's like I think really great about the way that the book and the film sort of present Jesus is that the life he has chosen hurts other people.
Yeah.
The path that he's
Right.
on alienates and hurts people who care about him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
yeah, yeah.
why. And so, like, his guilt and his sin here is what he did to Mary, what he believes he's done to Mary, which again is more explicit in the novel, that his rejection of her, like they were betrothed, he decided he could not get married and pulled away, and that shamed her and sent her on this path. And that's fallout of his ministry, right? Like his need to like live the life that he's living. And so that I think is like the sort of like negative, I mean, there's always like the who are you woman stuff, but like I think that's very like the way that it alienates him, the way that it hurts people who love him, the way that it draws kind of, or it causes people to dislike him.
Right. In the morning after, he's like, yeah, I got to go. And he just
he
does.
goes out
Yeah,
into
he-
the wilderness, and this is not the first trip. This is not the lone trip into the desert. This is the trip to see the ascetic, who is also not the ascetic he'll see later, which is John the Baptist. This is some other guy.
Yeah, I love old men beckoning me into yurts.
It's the best. So yeah, he goes and sees that guy. That guy dies. I didn't fully understand what was going on here.
Yeah, okay, so
And apparently
here
the
was
guy
a-
was already dead. Yeah.
This is
What
a
was
question.
this?
This was a question I had. He walks in, and this what we later learn is a force ghost. Basically says
Right.
that the oldest man in the monastery has died. Like the old wise man of the monastery has died, and they're going to hold a funeral for him tomorrow. So you should meditate here and sleep or whatever. My question is, why is there a monastery? Why are there monks if there's no
there-
Jesus yet?
well,
Well, I think they're like not Christian monks. They're like
yeah.
Well, were there monks before
like the-
Christianity?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
my
yeah.
basically
Yeah, well,
question.
they're
okay.
living out in the
Buddhism,
desert. Yeah.
for sure, and Hinduism. Yes, like
But I think
monastic
they're
traditions.
old,
Yeah,
It's a monastic tradition.
Right, but
Whatever it is.
I guess what struck me was just like being in the Holy Land during this time. If there were monasteries,
Yes, again,
in this
Jesus was
time.
one of so many things, and there were like when we talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, that came from the Essenes, who were
Right,
themselves
right,
a
right.
separatist group.
Oh, okay.
A small group of people who lived in these caves of Qumran.
Right.
That's more, like I think it's Scorsese in the commentary explicitly draws a connection to the Essenes in this moment. But
Yeah.
but again, this is invention. I don't think this has any sort of parallel in any kind of Christian or Gnostic tradition.
Yeah, it's just basically an excuse for Jesus to purge himself of the two snakes that are living inside of him.
Well, and a lot of this
I think-
feels kind of Eastern too. A
Yeah.
lot of this starts to
Yeah.
feel, especially like him going out to the desert alone, which makes the most sense of that chapter that I think I've ever had of like Jesus is actually having to prove himself rather than and then this just happens. It's the thing that he does to get tempted.
Right.
It's actually a purification of the self. This feels like reading Hermann Hesse.
Yeah.
This feels like Siddhartha.
It feels like it's doing,
yeah.
It feels like it's doing a similar thing.
Yeah,
right?
and then he had to stand on one foot for 147 days, or whatever it was. Yeah.
What we get out of this though, with Jesus's trip to hang out with the ascetics, is
who all look like Jesus impersonators.
Yes.
Like it's Willem Dafoe, and then everyone around him who looks like they could play Jesus.
Yeah, they look more like Jesus. Yeah.
What we sort of get from this, or what Jesus, I guess, gets from this, is his sort of reason to continue, but also showing us that he's stuck, right? This is a crux for character development.
It's showing him that I thought what I drew from the scene is that the visions he is receiving truly are from the Lord.
Oh, sure.
In this case, like this is his proof that this is not from the devil. This is from on high.
But we also get a very...
Sorry, go ahead.
So we get an interaction with the other ascetic who's there too, where Jesus says something that's kind of interesting, where we get the sense of where he's at in this moment. He says, Lucifer is inside me. He says to me, you're not the son of King David. You're not a man. You're the son of man and more the son of God. And more than that, God. Do you want to ask me anything else? Like, he's fucked up at this point.
Yeah.
He doesn't know where he stands.
This is one of those lines that they kept talking about on like Oprah. He says, Jesus says Lucifer is inside me. And it's like, it's very clear that he's saying the devil is talking to me, which is canonical.
That's just the Bible. That's just the Bible, guys.
That's just text.
I think I think this scene, my understanding of it is like he doesn't know what to do with any of this.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And he goes out there. He's like, well, maybe I need to be a monk. And the monks are like,
So it's like playing this. Yeah, you can achieve your perfect spiritual self by becoming by climbing to the top of a mountain and sitting cross-legged for the rest of your life, or you can actually bring the truth of God to other people. And so like which one is more right? Is one more right? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe one is more right for Jesus.
Right. And Jesus steps right out of that yurt where he's been, bearing his soul, and Judas is there again.
What's going on?
This is kind of weird. This felt a little dreamlike to me.
And that was again where it's like, is this a flashback? Is this a flash forward? What's going on here?
Judas just found out again. I guess the spy network.
Yeah, tracked him down. He's Sam Fisher.
Zealots,
he knows. Like,
he's had tabs on him because he's had a hit taken out on him. Old Jesus has.
Yeah,
and
Diana Burnwood is in his ear.
There we go.
Here's your mission, Judas.
Does he not tell Mary where he's going?
Yeah, he does. He says something,
He's
but like,
I need
there sure is a lot of
forgiveness.
desert around.
Yeah, I need your forgiveness.
I mean, it's a big
or
desert.
is there that much
Does he just
desert
say
around?
no?
That's a
We
question.
don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, again, going back to like, ultimately, I stopped asking questions about the internal logic of the movie, and I just kind of let it be. And then I started enjoying it more.
It's really, really fun. This movie is so much fun to watch. Like it's long, but you don't ever feel exhausted by it.
Yeah, that was like a lot of the main complaints in actual critical reviews of the movie was like there are shots that are too long. There are moments that I didn't get that at all.
No,
and maybe it's because AJ and I just watched a Tarkovsky movie,
which is very slow.
I mean, I'll dissent here and say that I did find it a little much at times, and I did want to be like,
are there specific
come on, let's keep moving.
Specific moments that
I think when maybe more toward a little bit later on when we actually got to the traditional like Passion of the Christ, where I was like, I get it.
Okay.
You're
I
like,
get
I know
it.
this part, right?
Like we've been there. The most interesting things about this movie is when it sort of subverts the traditional biblical narrative.
Right.
The least interesting parts are when it tightly follows it.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
I agree with that entirely.
Yeah, and I will say the restraint they actually show for the Passion in this movie compared to most other depictions I've ever seen of the Passion, like I actually thought it went pretty quick.
Yeah.
I think they cut out a lot. But
Sure. But I can see where it's just kind of not as interesting.
Yeah. Judas says, you have to talk to John the Baptist.
Right.
And John the Baptist,
baby.
John will know.
Yeah.
And then so then he goes to John and his hippie party.
Right. And also and Judas is also like, look,
right,
but
yeah.
I'm gonna like be watching you.
Yeah.
And if you don't stay on that trajectory, you're done.
You're dead.
Like,
I'm slitting your fucking throat.
And John the Baptist is an absolutely unrecognizable Andre Gregory.
Yes.
He is leading what seems to be a rather ecstatic tradition.
Yeah.
Not ascetic at all. There are people basically sucking and fucking in the Jordan River.
And by this point, too, Jesus has already accumulated his apostles.
Yeah.
He's done a few of his, he's done the Sermon on the
He's
Mount,
gotten
some
the
of his other
sons of
stuff.
Zebedee following
Sons of Zebedee
him.
are in the bag.
I also think crucially, like to our earlier point about like how the ancient world responded to this stuff, nobody bats an eye. Like Judas and Jesus arrive here, and they are not shocked by anything they see. Really.
Yes.
Oh yeah, no, this is just a normal fuck party in the Jordan.
Also, Zebedee is played by Irvin Kershner, the director of The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, in a very good performance.
Oh, he's wonderful, and he's not like he doesn't have a lot of acting roles, but he nails it here.
But it's something that's kind of fun about the way that this is presented is that you do see Jesus amassing a following, but it's almost in spite of himself. Because like when he goes out there and delivers these messages, most of the people are like, dude, what? Like,
and this is
let us
true.
throw stones.
So
We
much
wanna...
of this is like true to the gospel because Jesus will do something, and then people will be like, okay, I get his thing, and then he'll flip. There's one where he goes and heals lepers, and they're like, "Oh, you are him. You're the one who's been sent for us." He said, "Don't fucking tell anyone."
Right.
Right. There are people who walk up behind him and they say, "The King of the Jews is here. You know, the Messiah is here. God, the Son of God is here," and he casts them out because they're demons.
Right. He has this whole moment where he begins to give a sermon after he saves Mary, and then he incites a riot by accident, and like doesn't is it's a failure.
He says, "No, you don't rebel against Rome. You have to fight them with your love."
Right. And then they run off, and he's like screaming after them. I don't know. I'm so taken, I think, by Willem Dafoe's performance as like a guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Just
like
that
he's not very wispy.
confusion
He's so
and humility is always present in this.
Yeah.
We do not get the nozzle Jesus.
Right,
We do not
right,
get,
right.
Peter, I tell you.
And-
Before the cock
he's
crows
also
3 times.
so mad when they're throwing stones at him.
He's just like, what
He's
the?
so mad.
Don't do this.
When he humiliates Zebedee, he's pleased with himself.
And this movie uses this, this is another conflation, right? This is something that people sort of repeat, but in the Bible, it's just a woman. It is very much an unnamed woman.
Yes.
And Jesus rescues her, cast the first stone if you have no sin in you. This movie uses it to such clever effect by also using this as the moment where Jesus washes someone's feet. And we see also the affection, and because the Pope does this, the current Pope will wash people's feet and kiss their feet. And we see the kissing of feet as like a normal part of showing reverence and showing respect. And he's showing reverence and respect to a woman who was just about to be executed for being the lowest type of person you can be in the society.
And so at this point, once we get to John the Baptist, now all of this has been pulled in. And again, it's like John the Baptist's cult is like a weird, freaky sex cult.
He has it almost seems like he has no control over
It's
them.
wild.
Like this was also Scorsese's kind of perspective on talking about it. It's like he sees this as like some people are following him and then other people are like getting out there and just going crazy. And he was using sort of what's happening in the Philippines around Easter, people and the penitent movements and people who will flagellate and crucify themselves as part of its own sort of ecstatic tradition.
It's also a very like late 70s kind of feel, these hippies.
This is Jesus Christ Superstar, really, is what it feels like.
It's more like hair. So John the Baptist is he's excited to see Jesus, but actually there end up being pretty significant differences of opinion between the two of them about what should happen next.
And that's so interesting because it's playing, again, off of the actual scripture of like, no, you need to baptize me. No, who do you say I am? Like Jesus needs the proof and John the Baptist needs the proof. And it's who's going to give first. You got to give. And I think,
and John's proof is all the sound dropping out. I thought that was a really super effective.
And it's not a full like seventh seal, like all the sound dropping out. You still have the regular Foley of the water washing up against their ankles as they stand in the river, but it's all it's all the sound of the people and the drums and everything else that is gone. So you have it's a very narrow and specific isolation of sound as to only hearing the things that are touching the body.
I didn't even think about that.
Then he baptizes Jesus the wrong fucking way, like a goddamn fucking Catholic or CRC little bitch. Like some goddamn Episcopalian.
They don't call him John the Episcopalian for fuck's sake.
He's not the trickler. This is not an anointment. That's a different thing. Jesus has to be put under the water. It means submerged.
It's not deep enough.
Well, they should have gotten deep enough water.
It wasn't in the budget. I mean, I think there are points where where you see that intense reduction of budget.
And I assume it probably was that.
But I think the I keep referring back to this, but I just really, really enjoy the ways that this scene takes away our sort of like modern projections of like what irreverent religious and I think like sort of unfortunately like Western ideas of what this would look like. It takes them away, and there are drums, and they're singing, and no one's really listening to John.
No,
he's just kind of. But it doesn't seem like he wants to hold court either. He's taken with a spirit, and he's yelling into the and everybody's and there's dancing, but there's also just gesticulating. And people shivering, and people it's vocalizing and
it's John the Baptist lo-fi.
It's like a very
baptisms to study and relax.
Baptisms to study too. Yeah,
people are it's not what we think of when we think of like a religious moment. It's not what we think of when we think of
the world does not stop, the sky does not open up, the dove does not come down, but it stops for them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And these aren't European people.
Yeah. Right.
These aren't like European people from like 1892. These are these are this is a different tradition, and these people look different, and they act differently, and they respond to spirituality differently, and they don't know the story yet.
And I think the point too of it being a very individual moment for the two of them is extremely important, because that's sort of what this movie is trying to do. It's trying to be like, what could the actual individualized experience of a human Jesus be? What might that look like? What might that feel like? And so when we have the conversation next between John and Jesus, where John's like, hey, there needs to be a revolution and you got to be the guy. And Jesus is like, I don't know, man. Like, I just want to love everybody, right? It feels really real to that kind of guy, a guy who doesn't necessarily want to have to make waves, but is increasingly realizing that maybe he's going to have to.
And Jesus is the Messiah, the most unique man alive.
Right.
But John the Baptist is much stranger and more extreme than Jesus in his depiction in the Bible.
Yeah.
Of course, that all gets washed out. When
sackcloth and ashes.
I mean, he's wearing a hair shirt.
Right.
And eating honey right out of the fucking beehive.
And locusts.
Well, in the movie, he's really tapped into something. I mean, like, I loved probably the most disturbing thing in the movie is when, because of how scary looking Andre Gregory is, when
I would not have dinner with this Andre.
No, I would not.
He walks up behind John. This is before you see John's face.
Yeah.
And he walks up behind him, and then before he can say or like get his attention or anything, and everything's so loud, it's not like he hears him. He just spins around and goes, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
Like right into Jesus's face. Yeah. And it's like super fucked up and scary. And it feels powerful.
And I feel like that's in some way some of the value of that, seeing the monastic group from earlier is like you can get the sense of like there are other guys doing this right now,
and they're doing it in different ways.
We are in a world of
ways.
people who there is a new there's a new spirituality arising from this time where Israel and Galilee and Samaria and Judea are occupied by Rome and being met at the crossroads of these roads that are being built in the new far reaches of the empire. And people are coming from North Africa, and people are coming from Syria, and people are coming from India. Like this is a totally new world that is growing into something that cannot be controlled, right? And this ends up being a problem for Rome later on.
And so at this point, Jesus now is increasingly coming to the understanding that he needs to do something. Yeah. All of these movements are happening. They're happening in different ways. And he's going to have to come down in some way, shape, or form. He can't just keep existing.
Yeah.
So when we get back, we'll talk a bit more about what that looks like for him and for all of us.
Ooh.
Stay tuned.
This week's episode is brought to you by Willem Dafoe's terrifying penis. Wait, that can't be... What was that? Listeners, I think it's in the room with... I loved you in Antichrist. You know, I'm something of a penis myself.
we're back. Jesus has been baptized. We love it. We love to see Jesus baptized. And the other thing we love to do is see Jesus go.
He's not baptized.
We love to see Jesus go into the desert and draw a circle.
He lets it be unbroken, too.
By and by.
Yeah. He goes out into the desert, and we get this shot that actually looks like the final shot of the movie The Rapture, which is a great movie. I just love the way we used to shoot night scenes. It's just like a gigantic fucking spotlight on it.
Yeah.
And then we get the known temptations. We get the things where like these are the pieces that are in the 4 gospels of how Christ gets tempted.
Because it's Mary Magdalene voices the first temptation, and then it's Keitel voicing the lion.
Yep.
And then the pillar of fire is just some guy, I guess.
It's the director of Peeping Tom with his voice blended with Martin Scorsese.
Wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Scorsese got a lot of his director friends in this one.
Yeah,
for
sure. Well, $7 million. It's
like, hey, you want to come to Morocco with me for a week?
Right.
Sure.
I really enjoy that there's animals coming. I mean, again, like I'm really like taken with the approach to like the way the spirit world.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
you know, I don't think that the circle that's extra biblical, right? Like that's
that's not Bible.
But he draws a circle, which like, if you've ever dated a girl that was into magic,
Right.
like you know exactly what that is, and he's approached again, and there's this sense that things that the boundaries between things are porous, right? The first one is Mary Magdalene, but it's actually a cobra, right? There's a cobra speaking to him with Mary's voice, and she says, "Look at my breasts," and like we assume Jesus can see her, but we see the cobra. Snake.
Yeah,
I was looking for cobra titties really the entire time, just scanning
You
that whole
can find
body.
them on the internet.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sure.
going to say DeviantArt.
yeah. G.I. Joe Rule 63 is what you do.
And
Rule
and then
63?
Yes, Josh.
Okay.
That's where you flip the genders on the character. That's Rule 63.
Really?
And it shows also Jesus knows how to differentiate between temptation and revelation, because he knows that God, as his protector, will not allow the devil into him.
Into
Truly
that circle.
into him.
That
And so
circle
he says,
is
okay,
the line.
if what you're offering me is true, step in the circle.
Right.
And then he threatens to punch out the lion, which I thought was so funny.
Right.
I wanted to see Willem Dafoe fight this lion.
No, you'll have to watch RRR for that. Well, technically a tiger, but
There's that question of whether or not what he sees is a lion.
So we have gotten this like apple tree as a symbol before. This is actually one of the things that I don't quite follow, right? Before it makes sense, he's sitting under a tree, he's eating an apple, he throws the seeds out. We get a cutaway, it cuts back the apple tree has grown.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He's just told the parable of the sower. We got the seeds of the gospel, etc. And here an axe appears in the sand next to him, and he goes and he chops down an identical apple sapling to the one that appeared before him.
And this is also the axe that John the Baptist had offered him previously, if I recall correctly, where John was like, here's an axe, you're going to have to go and hack some shit up.
Well, you've built up this state, right?
Yeah.
Like you've built up this tree, and now you have to destroy that previous version of yourself to become the warrior that you have to be in order to fight for God. Also ties him to George Washington. He cannot tell a lie.
That's true.
He cut down that apple tree.
I mean, like the most craven.
It's a cherry. Cherry tree, AJ.
Get his ass. Get him.
Are you?
Wow, so you're a Catholic with American history too.
Do you think that George Washington was Johnny Appleseed?
yes.
We listened to that whole Adventures in Odyssey episode.
Clearly, I retained so much.
The apple tree. I think there's like this idea of sin and
Right.
Bite the apple. Things of that
and
nature.
I think that
Destroy the origin of sin.
I wonder to what extent there is also this idea at play again of like, we don't know what this symbol means, and it means something different in every scene because Jesus's relationship to his own ministry is changing throughout his life, right? Like he's planting, and then he sees the tree differently because now the tree means.
Well, and in this case, he bites the apple and it starts bleeding, which I thought was a really cool visual image.
This is. I mean, that's actually a very good point. Is like this is not following in this sort of typical Christian tradition of God as always unchanging and always all knowing and always existing at all points in time. This follows much more closely with the God of the Old Testament, who can be convinced that he is maybe incorrect about something. He can change his mind, and what better way of what better example of God changing his mind than the arrival of Jesus Christ to be the savior of all mankind, right? That is a totally different way of God, of this continuity of God relating to people and to creation.
And Jesus's journey in this movie is very much like, what do you want from me? What do you want me to do?
And the big thing that he takes away from this experience of being in the desert is that he thinks, at least Jesus thinks, that what God wants is for him to go in there, axe in hand, and take out the entire existing order.
And what we get is one of the most metal scenes in, I think, any Jesus story ever, where Jesus returns to his apostles, his disciples, and rips his own heart out of his own fucking chest.
This is not from the Gospels. It is not from a Gnostic tradition that I am aware of.
Is it from anything?
It's
or
not
just make
from
it
the
up?
book.
No.
Paul Schrader wrote this scene out, again, thinking about the idea of people living in this magical world and Jesus as a magician performing this magical act of tearing out his own heart. Also, he holds his heart out from his body. Josh, does this remind you of anything?
Yeah.
A heart being
He's
perhaps
offering
offered?
it promptly, sincerely.
Maybe even sincerely. This is the logo for Calvin College.
Oh, shit.
Paul Schrader, apparently accidentally, someone else reminded him of it, but he was like, oh,
shit, you're
definitely
right.
did that.
Oh,
And
that's
he
so
put in
funny.
the logo for Calvin College as a symbol in this film.
Unfortunately, the seal of Calvin College is not a hand holding like an actual beating human heart. It's a little
it's-
dinky fucking love heart.
It looks like a butt.
When you're doing the gesture, it looks like you're holding balls.
Yeah.
They do a cool thing where it appears that the way that the effect is achieved is actually there's a jet shooting blood up, but it looks like the blood dripping from the sort of like turns the whole. When Jesus rips his heart out, he's standing in a puddle, and that puddle then just becomes this opaque red.
There's a few moments like this where it's like they had to create a practical effect for $0.
Yeah.
So they
Like-
were just like, what the fuck are we going to do?
Same as like that jet of fire when the devil is tempting him.
Right.
They probably just took a propane tank, opened it up, and lit a butane lighter next to it.
But it's a miracle that it doesn't look cheap. At least none of the practical effects really struck me as like looking cheap. There were corners cut obviously in other areas, wigs and
the
costumes and such,
and extras.
but like the practical effects are very effective.
Yeah.
Well, and that's important to this scene, right? Jesus pulls out his heart, but like that could just be anything. It doesn't look like he does it with any particular force.
Dafoe like uses both of his hands and then covers whatever, and you can see it, but I think like part of what really makes it work is that Scorsese is the kind of director here who is saying like, well, if we can't make it look real, then we shouldn't try to make it.
It is very
real.
theatrical, isn't
And
it?
so,
Like-
and so the moment is like, is this real? Is the movie saying this is a real thing that he did, or is it saying that he's set up a trick?
Right.
And then you see the blood in the water boiling up from the deep, and you're like, oh, this is the real deal. This is something the movie is saying is totally true.
And as a result of this, now the message is clear for everyone that we are going to go in there and we're going to fuck Rome.
We're going to
up.
bring not
That's
peace,
the
but a
objective.
sword.
This is when they walk, and this is when he starts healing lepers, right? And every single leper, it looks like he's snapping their neck. Right?
Yes.
They're coming up to them. He's grabbing them by the face and spinning them away from them.
I had a question of whether they were lepers or whether they were the demon possessed.
I had that question too.
No, you're right.
Because they are always depicted in the Gospels as nude, whereas lepers are usually worn rags.
And he's the words he's using are he's I cast you out.
My
Yes,
note here
okay, yeah.
was, who are these nude guys coming up?
Who are these nude guys coming up? Jesus really is Saturday's warrior at this point because he's healing people on the Sabbath.
But it's like it's like he is killing he's fighting them, right?
Yeah.
They're coming up to them, he's grabbing them by the face. It looks like he's snapping their neck, he's throwing them to the ground, but they're healed. And this is like there's that force to it, right?
Yeah.
He heals, they show him healing the guy's eyes, which is like one of my favorite bits of Keitel's performance. Then also he heals him, and then Keitel throws his arm around the guy and starts bringing him to the crowd and going, you see what these guys did?
They're marketing.
Yeah.
They're saying, like, look at what Jesus has done. He can do this for you, too. Yeah.
And some of this, I do think, looks a little silly. The other thing that's worth noting in this part is we also do get the wedding at Cana.
Yes.
This is where we get the thing that you were mentioning earlier, Matt, where Jesus.
It's just such a fucking
it's so casual.
I know, bitch. I'm the guy.
It's like,
no, go check.
Yeah, just,
Yeah.
But and this is another one where I'm gonna I'll continue to harp on this, but I love the wedding. I love how not a European wedding it is.
Yeah.
They are dressed in such extravagant.
The man is wearing
Middle
a veil.
Eastern. The man's wearing a veil. He has this piece of jewelry on his face.
Yeah.
They're carrying him above their heads. There's music that Jesus gets up and dances like an interesting.
The ring goes on the pointer finger. Yeah, that's a very important distinction.
The way that the woman is painted, I think it's just so. It's so lovely, and again, just reminding us that this is not a story that took place in England.
And here we're seeing Mary Magdalene as a follower of Christ, right? This is really important to the growing movie. We don't get a whole lot more extras, but we do get this idea that there are more people coming along. It's not just the inner circle of 12 men.
At this part, the movie really is moving. I mean, we get right here also into Palm Sunday. That moves.
And see, this is where I feel you were also expressing like this is the part where you lose interest. It doesn't necessarily feel long to me, but it is like, okay, well, we're hitting the Jesus points now.
Well,
we're doing all the normal
particularly
stuff.
after the wedding, I think there's something kind of special about how casual and low key Jesus's turning of water into wine is, because it's so different from the normal accounting.
Yeah.
But stuff like Palm Sunday, this really is beat for beat the exact same thing that you grew up seeing in church.
Can I say something about the water into wine thing?
Sure.
Because I really like the way that Willem Dafoe does the Leo toast.
Yes. He's just fucking smirking.
It's really lovely, but the one thing I don't like adaptation-wise of the story is that Mary's the one that asks him to do it in the Bible. And then in the very next scene of this adaptation, he asks his mom, "Who the fuck are you?"
Right.
And I think that's a little heartbreaking for me. I would have liked to have seen his mom incorporate a little bit more into this journey, because she was so important,
Catholic. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Come on, Scorsese.
But it is interesting because that is something that happens in the scripture. There is this who are you?
Oh, really? I don't remember that.
No, mother, my father is in heaven.
Okay.
Yeah.
But he walks it back. This doesn't happen in the movie, but in the Gospels, he's hanging on the cross. He's like, hey, James, take care of him off for me.
But
And
there's a fair amount of I think scholarship also on what does he mean?
Yes.
Here? What is he doing?
Yeah.
And this is playing with, again, the realism, the emotional realism, this feeling of I went to the desert. I have purified myself. I have thrown away my old life. I am now the Messiah where I once was a man.
This might also be a good opportunity to talk a bit about the music, because this is one of the parts of the movie where Peter Gabriel's score really just is it's full, it's swelling, it's very impressive.
The music is so interesting. This is the first time it really feels like Peter Gabriel.
Yes.
Other points, it's like, okay, here's the music. I mean, it's different because it sits in kind of that gritty 70s. They hired a folklorist, like an ethnographer, like someone to go around and find folk music. And in some cases, they rewrote some lyrics to make it relevant to the moment. But, it's all contemporary music from Morocco, from Syria, from the Middle East,
Sure.
And AJ, you had some thoughts about the music, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, the truth of it is that the only song that really popped for me in terms of me clocking it was the final song that plays over the credits, which just sounds like a Peter Gabriel song.
Yes.
Yeah, straight up.
It fucking
It's the bells
out.
It's the bells of rejoicing, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is that I could listen to that on loop for the rest of my life. He has composed, I think, a perfect piece of film scoring in this. And it is interesting that because honestly seeing his name at the end was a surprise, because he hides his Peter Gabrielness for a really long time. And it's only in these moments where it comes out sort of in these fits and starts.
It's really the credits and this scene leading into Palm Sunday.
Well, previous to this, a lot of the music in the movie is, I always get this backward. It's diegetic when people on the screen can hear it, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of the music is produced by people on screen who are playing music.
Yes, nude people with tambourines, etc.
Totally.
They must be nude.
People in the market,
Never play tambourines nude. It's very dangerous.
You just never know.
How are you playing them?
Then you get caught up in them.
Yeah.
Caught?
Yeah.
You get all twisted.
How are you hitting that tambourine?
Correctly.
I mean, really, the problem comes when you start throwing the tambourines at each other, which is a big part of like choreographed. Tambourine choreography is a really great tradition.
This does not happen in Southern Baptist churches, and we've had so many tambourines, let me tell you.
It's a classic situation where you're like, hey, who wants it? And it's like me, and you throw like a frisbee. And
that's getting too close to dancing.
You catch it, you spin it around on your dick a little bit. It's
Yeah, you get bonus points if you catch them on each of your tits.
And then your foreskin gets caught. That's why we have to get Kirkham-kized.
You have to be Kirkland-kized, which is the Costco version of a circumcision.
So
it's taking care of your own personal hot dog.
What bothers me here,
$1.50.
What bothers me about Palm Sunday is that we lose the connective tissue. Everything else has been like, that's why he goes out to the desert.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why he gets baptized, except not really baptized because you have to be submerged. It's a Greek word meaning you are submerging someone.
Yeah.
That's what baptism is. And this part, it's just like, and Palm Sunday happens. You don't see the crowds gathering and gathering and gathering, and you don't see him riling everyone up to finally come into Jerusalem and bring the sword with him.
And that's kind of the thing, is that like once we get through the gates, then it is like, oh, wow, now we're surrounded by Romans. But because of the fact that we've been disconnected from this idea of Jesus is really, truly threatening a violent revolution and an actual mob act, we don't have something to hang our hats on. And so all of a sudden, when there's these stakes where it's like, okay, Jesus, are you going to raise the sword and fight these Romans or not? Yeah. It doesn't feel connected, because also that's not part of the biblical narrative. Yeah. And so you need to create that connection more explicitly in the script as written in order for it to make sense.
I think there's like an interesting moment earlier on where Jesus quotes Elijah, I believe, and he's like, which is, I think it seems that he knows like how the story's supposed to happen according to that. Yeah. And I think it would be interesting to see some of that sort of like, like, oh, no, I have to get on the donkey. Good, we have a donkey. Scorsese's relying on us like knowing this part. A little bit. And it's kind of we're kind of just marking it to show some cool stuff. But I one thing that does happen here that doesn't happen in the Bible that I really love is we find out that Paul is Saul of Tarsus is part of Judas's gang.
He is one of the zealots, which is it's according to our understanding of biblical history, right? He was alive around the same time as Jesus, but canonically didn't meet him in life.
Yeah, I mean, where's Simon the Zealot is my question. Where was Simon during this whole thing?
He had a big dance number in the desert.
Oh, that's true. He was.
Christ, I know I love you.
There's I lose time a little bit here too, because like somebody comes up to Judas and is like, hey, because I think it's Paul comes up to Judas, is like, hey, so when are you gonna fulfill your contract? I'm like, how long is this hit job been out on Jesus? Like, how long have all these miracles been taking place?
I mean, this was before trains and printers and all that. Like, you could let things, you put a contract on someone, it's going to take a couple years probably.
And if it doesn't work out in one town, you just go to the next town over, and it's not really a problem.
I think Saul's problem is he finds out that Judas is one of his followers, right?
Yeah, that's the big.
He's like, oh, you're supposed to be you. I thought this was just taking a long time, but you're just not doing anything.
So all of this comes to a head here where, Jesus is up on the actual temple, right? Like he's here and Jesus is surrounded by Romans and he is questioning, should I lead the mob into a fight or not?
This is after the money changers, right? He does the whole money changers bit.
Yeah, because that's actually like before Palm Sunday in this version.
Yes.
I thought the tables would be bigger.
Yeah, they should have been
flipped.
They could have been a little bigger.
Well, that's
so
because
tiny.
of your Eurocentric Western standard. Jesus hasn't invented the chariot.
That's true.
Mel Gibson is the first person to introduce a chair into it.
But that was his only contribution to this story.
It's now back in that same temple where, yes, you're right. The casting out of the money changers had already happened.
Yeah.
As he is deciding what to happen, another very cool cinematic moment that is not from the Bible. His palms start bleeding.
He gets
the nail.
stigmata.
He's basically, it's like when Jesus has a panic attack, he gets stigmata in this version.
And so Jesus is like, well, they do run away for a little bit, but then ultimately it's like, you're going to have to turn me in.
Because he sits there and he waits for God to tell him something.
Right.
And we get the narration again. This is a very Paul Schrader thing where it's like he has this device that is in the beginning of the movie and it never shows up again, except here it shows up very briefly again with this one tiny line of narration where Jesus is waiting on God's word.
And we get this truly wonderful Scorsese shot where the Romans jump down to attack the crowds,
All five
and
of
we
them.
get a POV shot from one of the Roman centurion's penises as he's plummeting towards the earth.
Yeah.
So we see them falling down from above, but then
Who
we
are
just
these
get,
Romans coming down?
we literally get to see like his feet hit the ground
Yeah.
like we're in a first-person shooter. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
This movie lacks a lot of those Scorsese touches, in part because Scorsese doesn't have a crane on this movie. They couldn't afford one. They had a
Sure.
jib that was about 6 feet tall. That was as high. So he couldn't do any of it. You know, like Cape Fear has that like totally top down shot of the airplane coming into view. But it's like, and this speaks a little bit to some of the lack of confidence in some of this movie. I think Scorsese is one of the most confident filmmakers when he's really on it, right? Like you just like these crazy big swings, these unbelievable camera movements.
Yeah.
And here is is a much less confident movie because I think he's less confident without that budget. He's less confident without those same materials at his hand. This is again the first real movie that he made that wasn't really like operating on a nice juicy Hollywood budget.
Well, and I also think, and this is purely speculation, but I also think on some level it's also to do with the fact that he is working on a retelling of a story that is near and dear to the core of who he is as a person in the way that his other work is also certainly relevant, but not in the way that this is.
I
But
think
also,
that there's something to
isn't
that.
a
Yeah.
tradition that is so at that point really established, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And he's like,
Yeah.
I'm intentionally doing this in a weird way, and is this going to work? You know,
But you don't want to buck convention too much
Right,
because there
right.
are certain things that people are expecting from a Jesus movie.
Speaking of like your what you were saying about the Palm Sunday connective tissue, I think
Yeah.
something this scene achieves really well is it shows why the crowd turned on him.
Oh yes.
Which is they're so ready to go. They're waiting for the word, and he doesn't give it. And when Judas when he sort of becomes weak and can't move, and Judas ushers him away from the crowd, they
Well, and
turn
it's
on him
amazing
immediately.
how this movie sets up these moments of like, oh, we're going to see this again. And you don't actually, like the early stages of the cross, where you don't see those same moments parallel, or the washing of the feet, or you are always waiting for the moment for Judas Iscariot to turn on Jesus.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then we find out he never does.
Well, and this
Yeah.
is another, I think, another example of Jesus's path. Like when Jesus doesn't give the word, the
Yeah.
Romans fuck that crowd up.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's another example, I think, of Jesus's path. The things that he has to do hurt people.
Yeah.
You know, they have numbers, right? Like there's like 10 Roman guards there.
Yeah, it looks like they could take them if he had just given the word.
And
Yeah.
they immediately fall apart, and the Romans like run through them. They kill people.
Yeah.
They do everything, and all because Jesus was unable to give this signal or commit to violence in this way. And so once again, his purity, his pacifism, has actually caused other people to be harmed.
And the thing is, too, you know, Jesus's sort of indecision is in this movie is one of the things that keeps causing problems for him.
Yeah.
There's so many roads that he could go down, but he chooses not to commit to them. He doesn't decide to become an ascetic. He doesn't decide to just become a straight up hippy dippy guy. He can't commit to being a warrior.
Yeah.
He's always in search of an identity. And so this moment is also like, well, now he has basically the thing that he seemed to be committing most to this entire time. He's dropped that too. So where do you even go from here?
And,
Well,
but
you
now-
ask your friend to kill you.
Yeah, but now he's resolute. Now he does follow through on an idea.
Right.
That is the idea that he must become the sacrifice.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we see all of these other blood sacrifices being made, the blood of the sheep running through
'Cause
the
it's
gutters into the
Passover.
grates and everything.
Well, he has this wonderful line where he's like, Judas, you have to betray me. You have to like actually go through with this. He has this incredible line where he says, that's why God gave me the easier job to be crucified, which is such a cool dynamic between him and Judas that I think this version captures that I don't think I've seen in any other Jesus story.
Yeah. Well, it's always been an interesting thing in the way that like we talk about Judas Iscariot. Obviously, the authors of the Gospels hate this man.
Yeah.
In the Bible, it's like he immediately he either throws the money in the faces of the Pharisees, or he takes the money and buys a plot of land to hang himself, or
And his guts spill out all over
in the
it.
book
As
of, in the book of Acts, he goes out into his field and doesn't even hang himself. He just falls over and explodes because he's full of parasites. Like these guys fucking hated that guy. But when you look at the gospel from a contemporary Christian perspective, everything is set to happen. All of this stuff is supposed to happen because Jesus is supposed to be the sacrifice. Whether in the Orthodox tradition of he is supposed to be the natural bridge between man and God, or from the Western tradition of he is the go-between in sort of the judicial construction of this, where he is the last animal sacrifice in the same way that Abel's was the first. And in doing so, you need the cleansing of the blood. And so Judas and Pilate and the Sanhedrin and Herod are all fulfilling God's purpose, and there's no real message you can draw from any of those about the sins they committed because God was setting them down the path.
Yeah, well, in the way that
was always confusing for me.
The way that the actual Last Supper in Garden of Gethsemane play out, it's pretty much one-to-one to the Bible.
Yeah.
There's almost nothing in there that is in any way embellished from what's going on in the Bible.
Yeah, we get true transubstantiation, baby.
Yeah, well, drinking blood.
I think that's actually, like the one, the Garden of Gethsemane sequence is sort of boring, but the Last Supper is gorgeous in this movie. I think it's really beautifully shot.
It doesn't look
really
anything
beautiful.
like a medieval painting.
Right.
Nope. They are not sitting at a
They're
tall
just
table.
chilling. They're on chairs.
There's no
They're
chairs.
reclining.
Chairs have not been invented.
Nope.
Well, and Peter drinks the wine and it becomes blood in his mouth.
Yeah.
And of course drips onto the palm of his hand.
Right.
It's a stigmata again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a,
the way that Judas goes off and they're like, wait, don't go. And Jesus is like, no, he's like, just let him. Again, this is just straight up the way that it is in the Bible. In fact, in the Bible, Jesus is like, you know what you got to do? Like, get out of here,
Yeah.
This has all been preordained.
Yeah.
Because this movie is very Catholic and also very Calvinist somehow.
Yeah, no, it actually is sort of like the perfect butting of heads. It's this podcast. It is the butting of heads between Calvinism and Catholicism. And what we get is this
And
sort
the
of
Southern Baptist.
and Southern Baptist.
Yeah.
But
You guys are Calvinists too. Fuck off.
Not, but like...
but okay, so here's actually Gethsemane is actually the first moment where I had like a real difficulty with Judas's arc in this thing, right?
Okay.
If you set Judas as a zealot, as somebody who is against the Roman state at every turn, I could actually see him betraying Jesus fine in this movie. Him actually cooperating with the Roman state?
Sure.
I feel like that is a step too far.
And this is, I think, a problem with the excision of
We don't cut away from Jesus.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying this is a problem with the excision of
The Sanhedrin? Herod.
From because what Jesus is arrested by the temple police, right?
Right.
Who bring, they weren't called police, but they're the cops, the temple cops.
The temple cops.
They
That's
bring
who you are.
Jesus to Pilate. Pilate says you got to go to Herod, right? And that's why, like, that's not my jurisdiction,
in one of the Gospels,
guys.
Right.
Well, no, I know.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that, like,
I know.
is that in this, like, by cutting him out of the movie, you create that problem.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Because Judas cooperating with the temple police.
Well, but
sure.
I mean, that's what the difficulty is, right? He's been told by the Son of God to do this.
Right.
He has to do this. He has to collaborate. And by collaborating with the temple, he's also collaborating with those who are already collaborating with
Something
the
we haven't
Romans.
spoken about is
He's-
like the image of like Caesar's, like
Right, the
there,
statue.
There's a big
Yeah.
statue
with
of
the
Caesar
red
in the temple.
smoke sort of billowing up around him.
Once
yeah.
we have the betrayal, Judas's betrayal, this happens in the pretty normal way that you would expect. Again, we get that kiss. It is a long kiss.
Yeah.
It is a kiss. And I
there's
just,
love in
was
there.
a man
There's
kiss.
real love. It's real men kissing in the way that men do.
Yeah.
This sort of pays off, I think, something really, really beautiful in Judas's arc, where this comes back to what we were talking about earlier. The question of, like, does Judas, as portrayed by Harvey Keitel, do what he needs to be doing, right? Like, is he sensitive enough? Is he thoughtful enough? And I think that ultimately what it is here is that he wants fundamentally a reason to care, a reason to be. And the betrayal here is, yes, in part because Jesus said, hey, you got to do this. But it's also in part that Judas wanted a revolution, and that revolution is not forthcoming. And so those things combine together in a way that then for Judas, I think, pairs I am somebody who wants to see this revolution with I am somebody who really loves this man. Both of those things come to a confluence, and so the betrayal is the only way out.
And
also that this pays off in like Judas's big third beat in this movie later on.
Yeah.
But we also get a really, just because we brought it up, another really amazing practical effect here is that is we actually see the ear reattached.
Yeah.
And it seems that the way that they did it was that they have like whatever jelly, like what Willem Dafoe did was rip it off and then they
reversed it.
But
it's
such a
effect.
weird.
Very cool.
I just don't like. No other movie bothers with that. He just puts his hand there. He takes it away. The ear is whole.
And the movie wants again in the same way that the heart kind of felt like it was this real. The movie's like, no, this is real. This is actually happening. He's really attaching this guy's ear.
The skin knit back together in a way that's so gross. But I think, again, speaks to this movie's relationship to the body and Jesus' like corporeality.
And to the point, I think, of the body too, you know, this is really strongly emphasized in the actual passion part of this now, where, you know, Jesus goes up, we got this is, you know, this story.
Yeah, and of course,
Jesus gets hung up on a cross.
Yeah. Well, and Jesus first has a meeting with the thin white
That's right.
governor is what he is in this, not a duke.
Bowie's pilot is kind of interesting.
David Bowie, baby!
What's interesting is this was originally going to be Sting.
It was, in that
That's
first
shocking.
movie.
Because, with Bowie, it's like, oh, of course, he's a fantastic actor. I mean, Sting's not a bad actor himself, but he's not.
No, he's not
someone
as good
you
as
think
Bowie.
of as an actor in the same way that
But
you
I
do
also
with
think
Bowie.
Bowie is so weird in this.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They give him the
So-
full. They give him the
but
full
it's so
Zuckerberg
good.
haircut.
Yeah,
But he's also
it's a
very
Caesar.
No, I know.
Part of what makes it so
Went full
weird
Zuck.
is how detached he is from everything. And Bowie, I think, as an actor, feeds well into this because it's like, who the fuck is this guy? This pilot,
love
he's so
this scene.
weird.
It's also
Here's this guy who
fucking
showed up for like 2 days to shoot this thing.
But they're having a conversation out of Sartre. Like, it's not even like, it's not, the conversation they have is not like one-to-one with the Bible.
No,
even though the
not at all.
scene is, you know, not like alien to like these retellings, but the conversation they have is like a philosophical one. And it's like, it's about like faith and meaning in the world in a way that like was very surprising to me.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. There are 2 scenes in this movie that I thought you wrote, Matt, and this is one of them.
I agree. This feels like a Matt Barbot play.
Yeah. I fucking love this scene. It's so matter of fact. And usually when you get to the trial part of the Passion, there's a whole bunch of people on the outside screaming. Right. It's just a bunch of like, you feel like the sentiment of the public turning against Jesus. But in this one, it's 2 dudes in a room.
Yep.
Just chatting very calmly, and Pilate's like, you know, we have to kill you, right?
For some reason.
Yeah, he's just grooming a horse because he has other things to do. It's it's sort of taking away the majesty in the way that the baptism also took away the majesty of it. Right? Yeah. People were just around doing other shit, just as Pilate's like cleaning a horse.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing is too, to the point of Pilate having something else to do, so do a lot of the other people. I mean, when Jesus makes it out to the actual mountain, there's not very many people there.
There are children playing, which is terrifying.
This is just another day.
Why is that terrifying?
Because there's skulls everywhere. Because there's like bones littering the ground, and there's children just running around going,
Children playing at the public execution.
Yeah,
it's terrifying.
That's not. They're just kids. I think the public execution is more terrifying than the kids.
No. But the kids playing
that's killing people.
Normalization of the violence is what's scary to me.
Part of this was just budgetary. They had their one crowd scene that they could do.
Yeah. And this is the important one.
You know, we don't bother with Barabbas or any of all that. Like we don't have Pilate washing himself clean of this. He's just some fucking functionary whose dad, you know, did some job up in Scotland, so he got to have this job in Israel.
It's weird. It's like the feeling that you get going into the crucifixion is like, maybe none of this actually matters. Yeah. And that's what tees up the big twist so well here. Because as Jesus is up here, you know, he gets nailed onto the cross, he's hanging up there, and
we have the pain, we have the whippings and the nailings and the blood splatter, and we avoid the stations, we avoid all of the walk.
We have the storm rolling in, we have
the mockery,
all of it. But then all of a sudden, just as Jesus is about to die, everything becomes completely silent. Yeah. The clouds break, and we have a really fucking annoying child actor.
I don't think. Oh, that's
She's
unfair.
fine. I
She's
didn't
fine.
find her much of anything,
Well,
honestly,
that's the
Josh.
difference between you and me. The moment that this child
it.
actor showed up on the screen,
The way
I was like,
use tambourines.
why are we doing this?
Yeah.
You're doing too much. You're doing too much,
it's a
Marty.
child in the story.
so
Good.
violently.
Let's talk about it.
Apparently, in the book, the child is black. And so
yeah.
they decided not to do
Yes,
that
the
for
child
the movie.
is a little black, like, because the logic is because it's supposed to be like a servant.
Sure.
You see? Do you understand? It's a
yeah.
servant, so they have to be black.
Yeah.
Jesus.
No, in this one, she looks Mormon. She's like,
Yeah.
That's the
she's
child coming down.
representative of she is like the white evangelical Western Christian
Right. I
ideal.
think again, this is Scorsese going like, what is like the movie language?
She also kind of reminds me
Right.
of like the Muppet that plays the Ghost of Christmas Past.
Oh,
in
sure.
Muppet Christmas Carol.
Oh, sure.
Little just glowing blonde child.
But yes, little
Yeah,
girl, and she's like, I'm the angel who guards you.
Yeah.
I'm here to. What if you didn't actually have to die?
You've done enough.
Yeah.
You've suffered
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah. What if? I mean, It's a Wonderful Life. We're finally moving into It's a Wonderful Life for Jesus. Like what would happen if you got down off that cross and just lived like a normal dude for a while? And what if you had sex with Mary Magdalene in a room where a child was sitting like 10 feet from you,
Yeah.
staring off
And
into the
so
distance?
Jesus has been most resolute, right? He knew the plan was sacrifice. He asked one last time in the Garden of Gethsemane, right, where in the Bible he's sweating blood. And here we have another point to finally doubt once more. I did it. I got all the way here. And she says, well, you don't have to.
Right. This is the titular Last Temptation.
Yeah.
And what's so weird about this, too, is like, this movie is like 2.5-ish hours long.
2:45,
And
yeah.
so, this is coming in like around the hour 50 mark. This is the third act, and it goes on.
Well, and this goes back to Schrader, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is about halfway through the novel. I feel like we spend a lot more time in Jesus's like mundane, boring life in the novel than we do here, because we get kind of like a highlights reel now.
Yeah, this I mean,
this
it
is
moves,
full montage.
it's dreamlike, you know.
I
it's-
think that crucially, one of the things that the angel does do, annoyingly or not, is reframe what's happening here.
Yes.
Yeah.
The angel says, "You've been tested enough," which is not what Jesus was doing, right?
No, this
You've
wasn't
been
a
tested.
test, yeah.
And then Jesus goes, "Oh, so I'm not the Messiah,"
Yeah.
and she's like, "No," and that's. If you stopped watching the movie there, then you could protest and be angry.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something.
But this isn't the end of the
But
movie.
there's so much more movie
It's
left.
not the end of the movie, but I think it brings us back to this discussion of Jesus's ongoing doubt,
Right.
and I think it also gives a lens. It makes us understand. I think so much of his indecision is he's important, and what if I'm important wrong?
Yeah.
And as soon as he gets told that he doesn't have to be important, he can just be a guy.
Yeah.
He's much more chill
Yeah.
about
And he's
everything.
much happier too.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I think what's so the way it was sold to me was that she was just like, hey, remember, like, Abraham didn't end up killing his son.
Yeah.
Right? God stopped him before that happened.
Yeah.
There's precedent for this.
Right.
Right.
In history. So like, I don't know, man, why don't you come with me? And I genuinely bought it.
Yeah. Well, and he doesn't fully assent to it either. It's
Right.
just then the next thing you know, she's pulling the nails out
Yeah,
of
it's
his
like
feet and
let's
hands
see
and
what
walking him down.
let's see what happens
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Also,
you know?
a really interesting dreamlike sequence where it's like it's hard to
Yeah.
like she's suddenly like face to face with him while he's on the cross.
Yeah.
and
he's
moving.
walking away, and everyone's still looking on as though he's still there. They don't
And
notice that he's behind.
This is
him.
an important thing
Yeah.
from a plot perspective too, obviously, because he is not really doing this.
Yes. Right.
He is seeing a vision of what could be, and so
And this is also notably, this is part of a real tradition, right? In Islam, Jesus did not die on the cross. There was someone else who either looked similar to him or was made to look similar to him who took the sacrifice, while Jesus instead ascended without dying, just like Elijah and Enoch. There's also a small town in Japan that said that Jesus Christ actually was able to come to Japan at 21. He came back to Judea at 30 to preach. And then when he was 33, when it came time for him to be killed, his brother Isukuri.
that's right. I remember this. Jesus' brother. Yeah, his Jesus' Japanese
instead
brother.
took
Yeah.
his place to be crucified, and Jesus went back to Japan where he lived to be 103 years old or
Right.
something like that.
I'm curious to hear something though, AJ,
Hell yeah.
because I had a very strong negative reaction to this child actor Angel.
Yeah.
And you did not.
Oh, I think it's just partially because of my child acting roots.
Okay, so
and
you're erasing my experience as a child actor?
I am, because it seems like there's a lot of self-hatred going on here, Josh, about child acting. Because I don't blame, I never blame child actors for being not great. And I actually think that in terms of annoying child actors, I don't even find her grating or annoying at all.
Maybe it's just I don't blame the actor either. I find it annoying to have a child here, I guess. That's what it is for me.
I think the child makes sense. Yeah.
That's the only thing that tracks for me, because that's what Jesus ultimately gets and wants is that family, right? Is a child.
And I also, I also think that what Scorsese's doing is he makes her like pristine white, British,
right?
He's like, this is a movie angel,
And,
right?
and that's
right.
part of your hint is that she's British, right? Who's playing the Romans? It's all the English actors. David Bowie, all of them. All the Romans are British, and yet this child, this guardian angel, this emissary of the Lord, for some reason is also British. And so
Satan as a pillar of fire is also a British person.
yes, yeah,
sure.
Right.
And
also
mixed with
Scorsese.
Scorsese for some reason.
Yeah.
So when what she does is she leads him into the world, and all of a sudden, and I've thought this movie in a lot of ways was visually a little bit dull, especially for Scorsese. Of course, you get some great scenes like the Roman jumping down from the ceiling, or a lot of the scenes of the crucifixion, like the camera going sideways, or following the cross as it gets lifted up. It's sort of like POV, or it's like attached to the cross itself. Really fascinating, very Scorsese kind of shots. And then here you see why it was kind of looking boring on the color palette, because he was
waiting for it to
all
pop.
of the color until this moment where Jesus walks out and sees the world apparently as it always has been, which actually
it's
makes
like our
sense.
town, where it's like, here's what I've been missing the whole time.
And it's like, of course, because like, our picture of like ancient Egypt, ancient Israel is influenced a lot by our modern day perspective of these things. We see pyramids in the desert and all that.
Right.
But
they're shooting in locations that are already ruins.
yes.
Right.
But 2,000 years ago, these places were verdant and opulent, and and now even the ruins are a different kind of ruins. They're not they're not old Arab ruins. They are old Roman ruins from when this was like, Carthage.
There's a reason too that Palestine has always been like a hotbed of occupation and expropriation, because it's one of the few fertile places in that area.
Yes, yeah. So we focus on the Dead Sea or whatever, but there's plenty of places that look like this, that are great.
Right.
I mean, they never left Morocco.
I went to Italy last year, and I saw olive groves. And I was like, oh, that I get it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, oh, that's like they're. I don't know what I think because of the context of the story of Gethsemane, I picture these like gnarled, I picture it just like very unappealing and like and because it's such a tortured, dark story, but like they're beautiful.
Yeah.
They're so beautiful.
And what Jesus gets to experience here is for him beautiful, right?
There's flowers for the first
flowers, time. He then sees Mary Magdalene. He's like, hey, what's going on? And the angel's like, oh, it's your wedding.
Yeah, he's walked into his own wedding.
How about that?
The life has already been ordained for him. It's already set in place, and she's there to marry him.
Right.
But then he's still covered with all of his wounds and scars, so she like washes the blood from him.
And then they become nude. And then
they become nude. This is the Jesus has sex movie. Jesus certainly does.
It finally happens.
And
Jesus has sex.
And
folks.
what's so funny is that Willem Dafoe has the same sex moves in Antichrist that he does in this one. Like, that man just has consistent thrust to butt clenching ratio.
Also very, very brief considering like
all the controversy.
Like, you see more of him than her in that scene. And he's still got pants on.
This is not intended to be a porno, right?
Yeah.
Like this is very much just because, again, the idea is he is experiencing his last temptation. We don't need too much to know what's going on.
It's not a purely carnal, detached act. It is an act of love. It is an act within the context of marriage, and it is procreative by nature because it cuts immediately to Mary Magdalene as a pregnant woman.
Right.
Yeah.
One other thing that I thought was kind of cool about the way that the dressing of the wounds was shot was that with the way that the light was coming in, it was very much reminiscent of traditional scenes of baby Jesus in the creche.
Yeah.
Lying in Mary Magdalene's lap in the way that it is traditionally depicted him.
Well, Mother Mary.
No, that's
but
what I'm
in Mary
saying.
Magdalene in the movie.
Oh, I
yeah,
understand.
yeah.
Mary Magdalene in the movie. Yes.
Yeah.
yes.
reflects Mother Mary in all of this art.
It's like
yeah.
a Pietà and that.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
There's a
me
couple
neither.
of moments where Scorsese, I think, is playing with like Renaissance depiction.
Yeah.
Especially in this sequence.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff, I know he was drawing off of the Dutch guys for a lot of this movie, especially for the crucifixion. That's where a lot of that was coming from. And actually historical data, like that's why the crosses are so short. They're actually designed to be more like how they were. Apparently, there's not a whole lot of archaeological evidence of crucifixes because they're made out of wood.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they lose them pretty quick,
And
yeah.
they sort of like they play the middle there too. It's like there's one like Jesus is on a cross,
Yeah,
but the
a
other
couple
two guys
other
are
on
crucified to
trees.
trees.
Yeah.
They do the thing that was very popular in like the 80s and 90s of like the crucified through the
wrist.
wrist,
Yeah,
and through the
instead of the
ankles.
Yeah.
So I have a question for everybody.
Yeah.
This part, did this work for you? Because I found it very silly.
Oh, what?
No, I found all of this to work. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, like,
this particular
all this stuff
it's
with
a
Mary
wonderful life.
Magdalene, It's a Wonderful Life,
Yeah.
them getting together.
From here to the end of the movie, you mean?
Just up until this point where it's like the stuff with Mary Magdalene and her situation, going through also to her then like immediately fucking dying.
I think it's weird, and it felt more like the knowledge that there was a book. It felt like, okay, we're just zooming through the book.
Yeah.
And it's playing with a lot of traditional heresies. It is playing with the heresy that Jesus Christ had a child with Mary Magdalene, although they don't actually have a child this way.
They don't, yeah.
But it also plays with the conflation of Mary with
Right.
Martha,
Yeah.
all as one person.
Yeah.
And then he does have children with,
Right.
over there. But
Almost
it's
taking two wives.
Yeah,
later.
it's a lot. It's
Yeah,
a
so
lot here.
Which the two
My
sisters
note-
are really cool with, I guess.
Yeah.
My note, actually, to the point of it being a lot, my note was, you're doing too much. Like, let's bring it in a little
Yeah,
bit.
it could
That's just me, though.
It could have just been a life with Mary Magdalene, but I get
Yeah.
the point of wanting to illustrate that an ordinary life is not a
Yes.
life free of tragedy or events.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah,
sure.
yeah.
I
agree with
think
that.
I think there's an interesting thing. I think in the book there is a way where you can go, oh, this is the story about Jesus leaving the cross.
Yeah.
And then you get a twist at the end. And that's harder to do in a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Scorsese decides you're just not supposed to trust it. Like when he
Sure.
walks from the people are still screaming at the cross. He gets walked into his wedding, and like
Yeah.
there's a wedding, and
Right.
like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's a way where Scorsese is saying like, this is weird. And
Yeah.
it's gonna be weird. And
Yeah.
the feeling that you have that it's weird, just hang with it.
Yeah, and I found too that then the moment that Paul showed up,
Yeah.
Saul of Tarsus, now who has become
Yeah.
Paul, preaching about his conversion experience on the road to Damascus, for me personally, this is when it snapped back into place
Yeah.
again, because then I understood why the previous
Sure.
stuff had happened and was weird, because it's like, hey, all of that has been very different, but now we're right back along the lines of how things are in the Bible.
Yeah.
But nothing has actually changed.
Yeah, so the suspense of this scene is so great because you're watching it thinking, what is he going to say? He is calling himself Paul. Now we saw him
Right.
earlier. We know who this guy is if we're familiar with the history here. And so it's like, what is he going to say? He's a zealot still, or maybe he joined someone else. Maybe some other guy was Messiah. And he keeps talking and he tells the gospel story exactly as you know it. Jesus died on the cross, rose in 3 days. He visited the disciples. He was seen on the road. He appeared within the locked
Right.
house, all of it, and ascended to heaven.
and you're like,
And you're like, no,
that
he's right
didn't
there, though.
happen.
Yeah, and that's what Jesus says too. That didn't fucking happen.
The power of the gospel has pierced through even the individual decisions of the Messiah.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and I think in a very like keen criticism of Paul, he's completely unimpressed by Jesus when he meets him.
Yeah.
Right.
And he says, I don't care whether you're Jesus or not.
That's just
If I have
Paul
to
as a
kill you
dude.
myself, I'll do it.
And I gotta say,
Yeah.
Harry Dean Stanton does some
So
fantastic
good.
work
Yeah,
here.
Yeah.
That's a weird choice for someone like Paul, because he's not someone you ever think about as getting very excitable, but he's perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, and what's this also plays with a lot of not necessarily heretical ideas in terms of people following the theology of Christianity, but a lot of historians, but there is a school of thought among historians that there was no Jesus and that this all started with Paul, because the earliest documents that we have are letters of Paul. So if you start with this idea that you have the actual leader of the cult being this man going around saying the end times are near, there was a Messiah and he came to earth and he is now departed, and pointing to Jesus Christ, then here you have an example of that playing out in this movie.
Yeah.
And I got to say, it's very, very Calvinistic. Once more, everything has been preordained. It does not matter what your individual actions or choices are, including if you are the actual son of God himself.
So one thing that I was also a little bit, I think is a little bit interesting about this scene is like it's unclear kind of, because the angel is very adamant that Jesus not talk to Paul.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I'm a little bit disoriented in terms of like levels of reality here. Right. Because is this not supposed to be happening in the angel's version of it? Or is the angel's illusion just around Jesus?
Yeah.
And Jesus really exists in the world? Like I'm a little bit unclear.
And then it
what's
becomes
going on.
muddies that even further once we get to Christ in his final days as an
because
old man.
There's another fucking time skip here.
Yeah.
Now Jesus has he's encountered Paul and realized that nothing that he has done can actually change the spread of Christianity as a religion. But he has been able to raise a family, and he takes good comfort in that, in his children and so on. And we get to his deathbed. And
and Jerusalem has burned now.
This is also everything outside is red, recalling the title card at the beginning of the movie with, the red everything.
Red with white text.
With white and on black with, that's how it looks outside is... Jerusalem has burned.
The world is ending.
The world is ending.
And again, this is what happens. It's not that long after the time of Christ that the temple is destroyed, that the people are scattered to all the ends of the earth, right? This actually becomes part of the tradition of Lazarus, who does not get murdered. We don't know what happens to him, but there are like two traditions. One, either that he ends up in I think Syria, and then the other one is that he goes to France. So one is for the Orthodox and one is for the Catholics.
France has a lot of France is also where the whole Da Vinci Code stuff comes from.
Yes.
Sure.
So it's no coincidence that Jesus existed at that time, in the same way that it's no coincidence that the Pharisees were there, that the Sadducees were there, that there were all of these new, zealous movements, that there were messiahs erupting here and there, and then the destruction of Jerusalem happens. And so these things are going to be set in stone. Right? You're going to have a major shift in Judaism, just in the same way that you're going to have a major shift in the followers of Christ and what they believe going forward, right? Where Judaism itself moves away from blood sacrifice and the temple to the word.
We also
keep the word.
Get the remaining apostles who are still around at this point.
This was the other scene that Matt Barbot wrote.
They come to visit Jesus on his deathbed.
This is almost a scene that Andras Vishki wrote as well.
Yeah, well, because there's the line that really stood out to me, the exchange of Jesus saying, Peter, what happened to you? And he says, I got old. And I was just like, God damn, I cannot believe you didn't write that line. Like fundamentally.
So let's talk a bit about this scene.
Because Peter doesn't get old, right? Peter is a martyr. According to tradition.
Crucified upside down.
But in this version, he gets old. Judas is also still around.
Yeah, he didn't explode.
What I really love about this section is you can feel the electricity of Paul Schrader getting to fuck with a text that he deeply respects.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's something so thrilling about him being able to say, yeah, Peter lived and I get to write for him. And he's just like, ooh, I get to write for Peter. And then Judas comes in and like fucking hands Jesus's ass to him. And being like, you know what I fucking sacrificed for you? I was out on the streets of Brooklyn fighting those Romans every goddamn day. You come out, you live, you want to be an old man, I'll kill you.
But this is also I think the scene where you get, I think this is what I was saying to you, Josh, earlier, there is a payoff to what we see Judas go through.
Yes.
Which is how dare Jesus make him do that? And then not die, and then not hold up his end of the bargain.
And this is also the only moment in the movie where you really see Harvey Keitel make the choice as an actor to fully break down. He is, there are tears in his eyes. He is just so completely beside himself, because it's like, how could you do this to us? We were all counting on you, right?
Yeah, and now the world's fucking ended. The sky is red.
Right. And we all know that Jerusalem's going to burn either way. Like, at least you could have given us some fucking hope, dude.
You could have done something.
And he gets through to Jesus, right? Jesus crawls up the temple stairs and like just pleads to God to take a bath.
We get the reveal.
God.
We get the reveal too of the girl, and she is the flame once more, right? And Judas sees it in the same way that Jesus saw the cobra as something else, but we saw it as the cobra.
Yeah.
Now we have this who sees what as what.
Right, exactly. Judas never sees the girl.
Yeah.
He only sees the devil.
Yeah,
Right.
he walks into that room knowing that the devil is in there, that Lucifer is inside. And I loved your reference to Our Town, because this becomes this decision of Jesus. Does he? Because a lot of like what Thornton Wilder lays down in Our Town is like, this is the life that like 95% of people live.
Right.
Yeah.
Like this is what most people go through. It's quiet. They are unimportant. They will not be written about. But then Thornton Wilder also writes The Skin of Our Teeth, which is about the most important people at any given point in history, and they're always the most important. And Jesus is choosing between the skin of our teeth life or the Our Town life. Be great, be the Messiah, or allow that anonymity to damn your soul.
Yeah.
Right.
and damn mankind.
Well, and I think also like there's this like clenching that Jesus is doing the whole movie up until this point, and then he sort of like lets go. And it's like it's okay to take pleasure in things.
Yeah.
It's okay. Like, what's how most people live. Like, again, in the beginning of the movie, everyone's like, you're a joyless nerd.
Yeah.
We don't like you. We don't like having you around.
Yeah.
And his ability to just like, if he's able to feel things, he's able to experience, I was talking to AJ on break about it. Like, there's a shot that is, again, composed very like artificially, like a Dutch painting, where right after he talks to Paul, where he lifts his son up into his arms, he spins around, and then everyone else in the scene arranges themselves around him, and you just sort of see him in the midst of, and he loves his son so much, and you see everyone, all the people in his life who are important to him now. He's not alone. He has two wives. And they both adore him. He can't have that. You're not allowed to have that. Like that's not
he has to, because these are the temptations in the same way that, because this doesn't happen in the desert in the movie, but this happens in the Bible.
Right.
The devil shows him the world, shows him all things and says, these can be yours.
But,
and this is that.
Right. But Kazantzakis is not saying, and like, that's the thing is like the sin, the temptation is not power. It's not salacious. It's not, what's the word I'm looking for? Debauchery. Which is what I think it's just.
And that's what I think
it's being able to not care about
and
stuff.
the debauchery thing too is what it was so frequently portrayed as in the run up to the release of this movie, as well as immediately after its release. And it's like, I was so surprised, because when it wrapped up, because again, at the end of this, it's just like,
you're like, where was the offensive part?
No, he sees the thing. He realizes that it's the temptation. He chooses to die.
Yeah.
And
we're back on the cross.
We're back on the cross, and that's the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's like,
what it ends with is a really interesting thing where they just accidentally had a take where the last part of the film got exposed.
Oh, and they just kept it in
And
there.
they just kept it.
Jesus broke the movie.
Right. It's this interesting. What do you do with that moment? It's just like it feels so strange, and it's so
it was almost
meta,
it was kind of Kubrickian in a way. I was like, you watch that, and I think that if you're a Christian, you look at that and you are like, oh, okay, Jesus didn't do it. He didn't accept the temptation, just like it says in the Bible.
Yeah, he did it.
And maybe they added some details and you saw a titty, but like, I don't know. I genuinely don't get what the reaction to this thing was, because what I see here is a movie that I liked parts of it. I was not on board for other parts of it, but it's a fascinating movie that has so much to say, both about the nature of faith and Christian faith, as well as what it means to be a person, which I also think is the whole point of the gospel. Like, what does it mean to be somebody who is fully human and fully God at the same time? It asks these questions in such a deep and such a nuanced way, and you can take it from so many angles. And it's like, why did people not see that?
Because they didn't see it.
Well, yeah.
It's inconvenient.
That's sort of
It's inconvenient. Paul Schrader talks about this. People will say that Jesus is human when it's convenient. They will say he's divine when it's convenient. They don't want to engage with the inconvenient aspects of either of those natures.
Yeah, I think there's something there's something that feels very obvious around, like, if Jesus is not afraid of dying, then that sacrifice means nothing. It's not that sacrifice is in fact not a sacrifice, right?
Right.
Then if he doesn't want to live, then there is no then there's no meaning to it.
Yeah.
But that is like that's a very touchy, the humanizing of Jesus in that way is a very touchy thing for, I think, a lot of very religious Christians.
You almost become like Buddhist in a way, where it's the idea that desire existing at all makes him imperfect.
Yeah.
Which is what he thinks early on in the movie.
Right.
Well, and that's where you have this we were talking earlier about the Passion of the Christ.
Yeah.
But there is a real tendency, I think, especially in Catholicism, where like the humanizing aspect is physical pain.
Yes.
That is the thing that his experience of physical pain is the focus.
And in the moment preceding the Passion, the way that people tend to depict, especially in movies, this also happens. There's like an American TV movie in the late 90s that does this too. If you want to depict that Jesus is really just a guy, he'll splash water on his disciples, or like on that he does it in Passion of the Christ as well. Where it's like, they're by a big tub of water, and then he splashes someone. Yeah. See, he's just like us. He gets a little crazy. But it's inoffensive, right?
Yeah.
You splash someone, it's fine. There's nothing about that can make someone uncomfortable.
The Passion of the Christ actually has like one of
it's like focus groups.
As far as there's like a really but it's interesting because it is again focused on physical pain.
Yeah.
Which is like there's this one flashback that I find really effective where he falls for the third time and Mary flashes back to him tripping and falling as a kid and how she runs to him because he's crying and in pain. And like that's interesting and it's very humanizing.
Yeah.
But again, is fixated almost entirely on a physical injury.
Yeah,
and not
just
on
the weakness of the body, the limitation of the body, rather than the drive
no
of the
room
body.
for doubt there.
The limitations of the human spirit.
Yeah,
right.
Sure. Yeah,
it's a feeling like Jesus. Which is this is heretical, right?
Yeah.
The idea that God is just piloting a human body while he's here, which is not what we're actually supposed to believe.
Yeah, there's one heresy that ends up developing that this movie doesn't play with at all, but that they're trying to avoid the heresy of the body of all these other ideas.
Right.
Is that there just wasn't a physical guy. There was just sort of a Christological hologram that was floating around the whole time.
I haven't heard about that.
Doesn't
one.
really make sense of the transfiguration moment.
Yeah.
Right. But it's just like, there was just this spiritual projection onto the earth that could be brought away once it was not needed any longer.
Yeah, I remember in high school, like a theology class, there being our teacher making a distinction between resuscitation, which is what happens with Lazarus, and resurrection, which is what happens to Jesus. And resurrection is like Jesus is not his body is changed and made perfect.
Sure.
And it's kind of
it's so interesting too because Lazarus. The idea of physical resurrection was so core to a lot of early Christian belief. Like that was the central thing, is Jesus saying, "Believe in me, and you will live again." Because there were the idea of the spirit was not a popular one among early Christians, or especially Jews of this time. You had your physical body, and that was about it. So what Jesus is promising you is that in the end of days, the saints will rise. You will be embodied once more. Right. Calvinism applies to this. They say that
I believe in the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting.
At the end of days, the earth will be remade, and you will exist in a physical form
upon the earth. This is why they mummify popes.
That's what the new heaven and the new earth is.
There's there's like a really wonderful, I think, and this is sort of like bridging an earlier conversation with this one. Is there's in the movie we don't talk about the zealots led by Paul murdering Lazarus, but they ask Lazarus what it was like to be dead, and he said it wasn't that different. And there's a way to read that as kind of pessimistic, but I think there's a way to read that as really beautiful, optimistic. But I think like in the way that like heaven, like actually we have it pretty good here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In other words, there's a way to read it as like heaven is mundane and boring, but I think there's a way to read it as actually like the earth is pretty lovely.
Yeah. I think it's one of the Eastern traditions that ascribes to Lazarus that he saw souls being tortured in hell and therefore never smiled again for as long as he walked the earth, except for one moment. I actually really love this little moment because it seems so out of bounds for most of Christian belief, where Lazarus sees a man stealing a clay pot and he smiles at it and he says, "Look at that, clay stealing clay."
Wow. But Josh, to sort of, I guess
a waste of a smile.
Poetry walking by Lazarus saying, "You should smile more."
It's like, dude, that's really not that good of a joke.
But it's
Lazarus the communist.
To
Nobody owns anything.
To see Jesus as human and to like actually not want to die, it raises a lot of questions about doubt, which Christianity has built into it, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Thomas
Yes, the
is
plague.
there for a reason,
Yeah.
right? Like all humans naturally will like feel that, but they just can't have Jesus do it,
Right, well,
for
and so
whatever
many-
reason, he has to just be gung ho, Rambo to the grave.
Which is strange because doubt is not a sin. Like
No.
in any Christian tradition.
But like in the Southern Baptist tradition, it is definitely treated. Thomas's moment of doubt is treated as a condemnation. But he says, "You've seen and believed, but blessed are." He doesn't say it's bad. He just says that some people are going to be blessed more than you, I guess.
Sure.
You know, or it's a blessed to be faithful in that way.
Right.
But like, I mean, like Andras, I just mentioned Andras Vishki, his play Disciples. Very explicitly casts Thomas as someone who is in some ways more beloved, right? Who is closer to God because he has that ability to question.
Yeah, and in this Stephen Adly Guirgis play, Last Days of Judas Iscariot, which is also, I think, it plays with a similar thing to The Last Temptation, which is like writes them in a very like working class blue collar vernacular.
Yeah.
Thomas has this wonderful monologue, which is like, I needed proof. And he gave it to me.
Yeah.
And that is incredible.
Yeah.
You know? And like that's
Jesus does not cast him out of the locked room.
Right,
He says, "Here's my hand."
But you are cast out of that locked room if you in these very far right circles.
Yeah,
right.
and we've talked about that with our friends over at Brigham Young Money. You know, with Mormonism, the answer to theological questions is you don't fucking ask them ever.
Right.
Because they can't stand up to anything. But it is the sign of faith, and it is a sign of existence on earth if you can apply scrutiny.
And even in the Reformed Christian tradition, which is one that, relatively speaking, encourages inquiry, there's a point at which it's like, okay, stop asking questions. And Paul Schrader has talked about this in interviews.
He says that Calvin's whole thing was trying to provide a logical basis for all things, but it must leave open a pinhole of faith. And he says, well, if you're leaving a pinhole open, you might as well leave a barn door open because it's still going to be faith in the end. And if you have a pinhole or barn door of faith in us at the worst of all possible worlds, you can, of course, always subscribe to us over on patreon.com/worstofall for $5 or $10.
That's how you demonstrate your faith in us, is by giving us money.
Yeah, it shows your faith that we will provide you with extra content.
Which
2
we will.
Full episodes in addition to the 2 that we put out on the free feed.
That's right.
Plus fancy movie time.
That's
plus
right.
the monthly Lads cast for those at the $10 tier.
That's right.
And we have a live show that you should apply your reason and scrutiny to by buying tickets.
Yeah, there we go.
We have a discount code if you are a subscriber.
Wow.
If you're
you can get $5. You can get $5 off your tickets by subscribing to Patreon for $5. You're losing money not signing up for this deal.
If you live in New York, which most of you don't, you can actually see us in person at Caveat.
But there's also a live stream
on
if you want
Thursday
that
the 27th.
option. Yes.
And if you are not in New York, you can watch us on the live stream.
Yes.
And Matt, what do you have going on?
I'm, tired.
Yeah.
I've been behind on a lot of writing. No, I don't have a lot going on at the moment, but I, keep an eye out. I have some stuff going on in October that'll be pretty exciting.
October.
I'm just, it's like it's just in the future, and so I'm just gonna hang out,
getting you all ready for All Saints Day.
do some reading and some writing and some probably watch another Jesus movie before then. And
Great.
Yeah, hell yeah. And with that. Go join your local chapter of the AFA and protest the next movie that comes to blaspheme our Lord. I am the worst of all possible Brians.
I am the worst of all possible AJs.
And I am the worst of all possible Joshes. See you next week.
Amen.